Unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to.
Well, the scandal has also divided the Reform Party as Elon Musk calls for Nigel Farage to be replaced as that party's leader. Will the Musk comments split their supporters in two?
And today, the petition with now over 3 million signatures calling for a general election, remember, is being debated in Parliament today. We're going to speak to the man who launched the petition here in the studio. I can't get over these comments from Keir Starmer. What on earth is he talking about? He is saying that politicians who are now calling for a national inquiry into grooming gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them, are just jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. Does he not understand that by saying that, he is therefore calling a lot of people in this country who want such an inquiry also jumping on the bandwagon of the far right? What is that about?
It was the new executive elected in one of those areas that had one of the most heinous level of rape gangs activity in the last 20 years that called on the minister to establish an inquiry. Then the minister sends them a letter saying, we're not going to do that, you can do your own local one. That's what started this, not the far right. It was the elected council. I mean, how much clearer does it have to be?
If you're calling Kemi Badenoch Reform MPs and ergo supporters of those politicians, or at least the call for the national inquiry, far right, where do you go from that? He also spoke about the truth and misinformation and misleading comments on Twitter and the like, as if he is now the arbiter of what is and isn't the truth. You know, transparency, open debate is necessary when it comes to these issues.
And I think it's particularly galling to talk about something like the truth, when the truth had been covered up for so long. Whenever someone said that there is a particular problem in some of the Pakistani communities in certain towns across England, anyone who tried to speak that truth was told to shut up, you're racist, you're wrong, that's not the problem, it's all white people, ignoring the very specific community problem that has now been established again and again and again in over 50 towns in this country.
Yeah, let us know what you make of it all. GBNews.com/your say. Do you think that was quite the misstep from Keir Starmer there to essentially suggest that anyone calling for a public inquiry is now some kind of far-right bigot of sorts? Let us know. GBNews.com/your say. We are going to be speaking to Charlie Peters with the very latest as well.
Yes, that's all to come after your latest news headlines with Sophia Hill.
Thank you, Tom and Emily. A very good afternoon. It's just gone 12 o'clock, and here are your latest headlines from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has defended his position as Director of Public Prosecutions, saying child sexual exploitation is utterly sickening, and it was something that he had tackled head-on in that role. The Prime Minister has also hit back at Musk over his comments on Twitter that claimed Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips is an evil witch and deserved to be in jail. Sir Keir Starmer went on to accuse opposition politicians of amplifying what the far right is saying on child sexual abuse after failing to act for 14 long years.
Victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously.
Commenting on the criticism of Jess Phillips, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, has dedicated her career to tackling sexual violence and abuse and to being a voice for victims and survivors of the most terrible crimes, including child sexual abuse. She has worked with whistleblowers and campaigned tirelessly for justice for those let down by endemic institutional failure. Meanwhile, also this morning, Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to reduce NHS waiting lists, saying we need NHS reform from top to bottom and that he would fight for the NHS day and night. The Prime Minister has called for more convenience for patients and said that no institution is more important to the security of the country than the NHS.
Let me be crystal clear. That money will be used not as it's been in the past, as just sort of papering over the cracks. That's the definition of the sticking plaster politics that we were elected to change. No, this is the year we roll up our sleeves and reform the NHS. a new era of convenience in care, faster treatment at your fingertips, patients in control, and NHS fit for the future.
And today is Justin Welby's final day as the Archbishop of Canterbury, as he prepares to step down over failures in handling a Church of England abuse scandal. Almost 2 months after announcing his resignation, he will officially quit the role at midnight tonight. It follows an independent review that concluded John Smith, a barrister and Christian camp leader, might have been brought to justice if Archbishop Welby had reported him to the police in 2013. The Archbishop has made few public appearances since mid-November and did not give the traditional Christmas Day sermon from Canterbury Cathedral. And weather warnings across the country persisted this morning as many commuters suffered travel disruptions from severe weather. Major roads were closed, railway lines blocked, and Manchester Airport's runways were closed early on this morning because of snow, but have since reopened. Travel disruptions are due to flooding and thawing snow and heavy rain. As it stands, there are 60 flood warnings in place and 260 flood alerts. This comes after most of the UK saw heavy snow or icy rainfall over the weekend, and we even reached the coldest night of the winter so far at minus 13.3 degrees. And it's the start of ceremony season as the Golden Globes took place last night. British stars Hugh Grant and Cynthia Erivo were among the top nominees, but Hollywood stars Demi Moore and Sebastian Stan took home the win for Best Actress and Actor in the musical or comedy category. The hit musical Wicked and limited series Baby Reindeer were also among key winners of the night, with fans also praising Nikki Glaser for her masterclass hosting performance. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'll be back in half an hour, but now it's time for Emily and Tom.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past midday. Now, are politicians calling for an inquiry into grooming gangs simply jumping on a bandwagon of the far right? Well, that's the claim made by the Prime Minister when he spoke to reporters earlier today.
Yeah, it's quite an extraordinary claim. He also appeared to accuse Elon Musk of spreading lies, claiming that many of those calling for an inquiry are not interested in the victims, only themselves.
It is something about the nature of our politics, because once we lose the anchor that truth matters, in the robust debate we must have, then we're on a very slippery slope. And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts. And that's why this is actually an important point about our politics, not about what anybody may or may not say on Twitter. That actually isn't the main issue. The main issue is what are politicians here doing to stand up for the things that matter to our democracy and the way that we have robust debate. That's why I want to call this out.
Well, what do you make of that? GB News national reporter Charlie Peters joins us live from Greater Manchester now. Charlie, just to start with, what did you make of those comments from the Prime Minister, essentially suggesting that politicians who are calling for a national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal are jumping on a bandwagon of the far right?
Well, Emily, Tom, who cares what I think? Let's hear what the survivors have had to say, because I've been speaking to several since the Prime Minister's comments earlier this morning, and I have to say the response I've got back so far has been pretty stern and extremely critical. One survivor from Rotherham, she's anonymous because many of her abusers still walk around in that town. She said, victims all over the country deserve to know the true extent of why we were abused and who covered it up. It's so easy to keep blaming the far right. Every single time this issue comes up, we need to know the truth across the country. Another victim also spoke to me in the last half hour saying, demanding an inquiry into child abuse is not jumping on the bandwagon or far right. Refusing what we clearly need is appalling and unacceptable. Children live with the damage for years. Hiding the problem is not fixing it. Facing the problem will. That's just two responses I've had from several so far, and I have to say they're all pretty similar to that. what Keir Starmer is saying there is that also we don't need another inquiry, because he referred to the independent inquiry to child sexual exploitation. But as our political editor Christopher Hope outlined in his question to the Prime Minister, that inquiry, published in 2022, only included a subsection on the grooming gang scandal. It looked at 6 areas where none of these reports had occurred. They looked at Warwickshire and St Helens in Merseyside. They did not look at the 50 different towns and cities identified by GBNews as having compelling reports of grooming gangs or first-hand accounts of prosecutions and active police investigations into this sort of on-street gang abuse. So many survivors and indeed political opposition to the government are now saying ICSA, that report, was not sufficient, okay? There was a special section on Jimmy Savile, there was a whole section on the Catholic Church. But when it came to on-street grooming gangs of the sort that has led to some of this country's most appalling sexual abuse, it was only a subsection of an organised network's report. So when the Prime Minister says the previous government didn't implement the recommendations, many politicians I've been speaking to this morning in the opposition saying, well, why should we implement recommendations when we haven't had a proper investigation into this issue? There's no point, they say, drawing a line under the grooming gangs investigation when it hasn't properly been launched, when we haven't looked at those 50 different towns and cities. There are so many towns in this country that are crying out for that investigation. I'm in one now, in Tameside in Greater Manchester. This morning I was speaking to a local councillor who's urging this council to get involved and to release further details for its investigation. Many people around the country and indeed here in Tameside are saying that what's needed is an aggressive national review that goes straight to the heart of this crisis.
Charlie, it seems to me that over the course of the last week, we've had a lot of politicians talk a lot about a report, about an inquiry that lasted years and years and years and costs tens upon tens of millions of pounds, seemingly without having read the report they're talking about. Because they keep saying that this is an inquiry into grooming gangs. We've had an inquiry into grooming gangs, but very clearly, I mean, I haven't read the report, I have to say, it's 500 pages long, but I've read the first, I think, a dozen or so pages, the whole long introduction, and my goodness me, it goes into lots of detail about the Catholic Church, about the Anglican Church. It goes into details about all of these different areas, schools, Jimmy Savile, all the rest of it. It's an incredibly broad inquiry, and as you say, one subsection for grooming gangs. Politicians don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I really do invite more politicians to read the ICSA report. It was one of the first things that we did when I joined GBNews a few years ago to launch this investigation specifically, was to track what the government had actually done so far. And we obviously saw the handful of local reviews, but this so-called national inquiry, it just hadn't gone into the issue. Now, Tom, you say hundreds of pages. It's only mentioning Rotherham once in that report. It only mentions Rochdale once as well, and that's in relation to Cyril Smith, the Lib Dem MP. Telford, one of the towns with the local reports, which found over 1,000 victims in that town in West Mercia, is not mentioned at all. The idea that this is a national grooming gangs inquiry is for the birds, quite frankly. No serious reporter that I know who's looked into this agrees with that statement coming out of the government. And I'm also struggling to find a single survivor or campaigner on the grooming gangs issue who takes that view. Now, if the government say that they want to focus on the voices and the perspectives of survivors, I think they really need to clarify this point, because those 6 areas they looked at didn't have this issue. There are 50 more that they could look into, and that survivors are clearly calling on them to do so.
And Charlie, just finally, we're talking here about grooming gangs, rape gangs that are made up of predominantly Pakistani heritage men. Now, a report from the Home Office 4 years ago has been going around, and people have been saying, most child sex abuse gangs are made up of white men. You're wrong on this. There's not disproportionately Pakistani men. What would you say to that?
Well, that report also said that they didn't have enough ethnicity data to make a proper conclusion, but certain people took their own version from that Home Office report. there isn't enough ethnicity data because police forces across the country have shied away from recording the ethnicity when they look into this form of child sexual exploitation. In any effect, with the information that we do have from the Home Office report, it's very clear that Asians in general, but Pakistanis in particular, are vastly overrepresented in this kind of child abuse. That is specifically group localized child sexual exploitation. What's more recent academic studies have found that between 1997 and 2016, around 1 in every 2,000 Muslim men in England and Wales were prosecuted for one of these crimes. In Rotherham, it was 1 in 73 men of a Pakistani descent from 1997 to 2016 being charged with these crimes. Again, it's not possible, I think, for people to argue that this data doesn't exist. There's clearly more information that needs to be revealed, and one of the things that the opposition to the government is calling for at the moment is for the state to release more information about the ethnicity of grooming gang abusers, because when Suella Braverman launched her grooming gangs crackdown when she was Home Secretary in 2023, not only did she launch a task force which made well over 500 arrests in its first year, showing that this is still an ongoing national problem, but she also put in a request and a demand that local police forces should have specific data training and gather more information on data. That data has not been released. The Conservatives are calling on the Labour Party to do so. Will they?
OK, Charlie Peters, thank you so much for reporting to us from Greater Manchester there, and thank you for the good work you're doing on this issue. And that's the key point. We're not talking about child sexual exploitation across the board and all the horrific ways that takes place. This is about a particular group localised on-street group type of sexual exploitation and grooming. Yeah. And that's where we get this confusion, where people go, mostly white men commit these types of crimes. We're talking about a specific type of crime.
Yes, when it's dealing with different people hanging around school gates and sort of recruiting young girls into it. Because if you look at the child sexual exploitation statistics as a whole, I mean, most of it happens within families, horrifically. Most of these convictions are fathers or uncles. Yeah. And so it's a very, very different type of story to these gangs, these organised gangs that hang around, as I say, school gates.
And that's why that report was so inadequate, because it focused on a bit of everything.
Yes.
A little bit of everything, as if the grooming gangs are exactly the same as what was going on in the Church of England or in the Catholic Church. Totally different types of crime. In response to these concerns, a government spokesperson from the Home Office has issued the following statement: "No child should ever suffer sexual abuse or exploitation, and it's paramount we do more to protect vulnerable children, which is why we are working at pace across government to drive forward real action to implement the recommendations of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse."
It continues, this government is committed to working closely with survivors and expert groups like ACT on IICSA.
OK, well, the Prime Minister has also responded to Elon Musk, who claimed that the Safeguarding Minister, Jess Phillips, was a rape genocide apologist and should be put in jail.
Because those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, not interested in justice. They're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case, a gang grooming case. But when the poison of the far right leads to serious threats to Jess Phillips and others, then in my book, a line has been crossed.
Well, joining us for more on this and the other big political talking points from this speech is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Firstly, Catherine, I've got to ask you on what seems to be the predominant political line out of this. The Prime Minister saying that anyone, in effect, calling for an inquiry is associating themselves with the far right.
Well, I think that's very unfortunate because, as we've just heard from Charlie Peters and how lucky we are to have him, there are many, many reasons why the investigations, the inquiries that have happened so far have not been comprehensive and why it seems perfectly legitimate to call for a full national public inquiry. But the Prime Minister, of course, was wanting to talk in this first speech of the new year about the National Health Service. That's what he wants us to be talking about. That's what he wants the headlines to be about. Labour have plunged in the polls. They're keen to get off on the front foot, wanting to trumpet these reforms and what they say is going to bring the waiting list down. But, of course, inevitably, the majority of questions to him following that speech were about the grooming gangs and about Elon Musk. And our own political editor, Chris Hope, asked him very specifically why not have a full public inquiry, and said to him, are you concerned about what it might reveal about your role as Director of Public prosecutions? Worth saying that clip, which GB News put out on social media, has in the last few minutes been picked up by Elon Musk, and he's retweeted it, saying, yes, he is. But the Prime Minister really clearly very, very angry, hitting out at Tommy Robinson, hitting out at what he calls lies and disinformation, hitting out clearly at Elon Musk himself, though, of course, he doesn't want to say that, because Elon Musk, not only the richest man in the world, but going to be beside Donald Trump's side when he becomes president in just over a week or so's time. So this all an absolute nightmare for the Labour Party, frankly, also a nightmare for Nigel Farage and Reform, because, of course, yesterday, that friendship that they had, Nigel Farage praising Elon Musk as a hero and championing free speech, all went very, very sour indeed, didn't it? Because suddenly Elon Musk turned around and said that Nigel Farage didn't have what it takes to lead Reform, in his opinion, and that they need a new leader. So these tweets, these interventions by him, causing all sorts of problems for the Labour Party and for Reform. But of course, what he has done is put a focus on the grooming scandal, the atrocious things which were done to largely working class girls over many decades in many towns, and which many people say are still going on now.
Catherine, thank you so much. Catherine Forster, our political correspondent there on that press conference with Keir Starmer. Our poll of the day is Elon Musk right to be wading into British politics? And it's actually quite a bit closer than some of the previous polls.
Yes, no, it'll be an interesting one to see how that balances out. You can go to gbnews.com/poll to vote in terms of what you think. But it is interesting. I mean, I've just been looking, Elon Musk tweeting out there Christopher Hope's question to the Prime Minister, so much more. I mean, retweeting Liz Truss, lots of stuff on British politics that Elon Musk is looking at right now. But I've just checked the time in California, where he could well be. It's 4:20 in the morning.
So he's got an insomnia problem, by the looks of things.
I mean,
or does he get up at 4 anyway?
Well, no, because he's been tweeting throughout the morning our time, so I assume he's staying up late. And it's even worse if he's on the east coast of the United States.
Are you worried about him?
It's sort of 7 a.m. and he hasn't been to bed yet.
Should we be worried about Elon Musk?
Well,
he doesn't seem to sleep.
The guy just needs to get some rest, I think. I think that can explain perhaps some of his more erratic tweets over the last 48 hours.
Perhaps. But yes, do take part in that poll. Perhaps you're miffed at what he said about Nigel Farage not being the right leader for Reform and the like, but perhaps you appreciate his commentary on grooming gangs, I don't know. But commenting on the criticism of Jess Phillips, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, has dedicated her career to tackling sexual violence and abuse and to being a voice for victims and survivors of the most terrible crimes, including child sexual abuse.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. And up next, the latest crime statistics reveal that foreign nationals are 3 times as likely to be arrested for sex offences as British citizens. But does that data tell the whole story? That next.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Following the summer riots and the resurgence of far-right ideologies, the former Education Secretary told peers that reinforcing shared values is now more crucial than ever.
So we're asking this morning, should we teach British values or would it be a step backward?
Or how do you even start? To debate this now, we're joined by the Campaign for Real Education chairman, Chris McGovern, and political commentator Matthew Stadlen.
Well, I think these days, particularly in schools, it's quite fashionable to look at the negative sides of Britain's identity, particularly British history. Personally, I think I'm very proud of being British, and I think we need to be proud of our country like most other countries around the world are.
As Chris says, Matthew, lots of other countries do it. Heck, you only have to look at the United States, don't you, to see how sort of patriotic they are. Is there anything wrong in trying to instil a bit of that amongst our youth?
I'm just worried it sounds a little bit communist, Stephen, being told what it is to be British. I've got my own personal but very vague views of what British values might be: inclusivity, patience, being able to queue, decency, respect for democracy and the rule of law. But I mean, very many people will have different sets of values. Some people are racist. So are British values racist? You talked about the far right. I think we all know what the far right is. It's sort of violent, xenophobic racism. But if you have, say, I don't know, 3-4 million people in this country who might describe themselves as racist or far right, and they're British, or as British as you lot and as I am, does that mean those values get taught in schools? My worry is it's a little bit communist.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past midday. Now, according to new analysis, foreign nationals are 3 times as likely to be arrested for sexual offences as British citizens.
Yes, this is a study conducted by the Centre for Migration Control, and it also claims that foreign nationals were arrested at twice the rate of native Brits for all crimes, accounting for just over 16% of the total number of arrests.
Well, let's discuss this further with Krish Kandia from the Sanctuary Foundation, a charity that supports refugees. Thanks so much for being with us, Krish. I mean, these are fairly startling numbers on the face of it, that we do see an over-representation from these groups with these crimes.
We do, and it's interesting. First to say, this whole subject is not an academic one for me. I'm a foster parent, and we've looked after children who've been on the receiving end of sexual violence and rape. And so we've always got to put the victims at the heart of this and to see what better support we can give them. Second thing to say is, whoever you are, wherever you're from, we need to prosecute you if you've committed a crime, particularly a sexual crime against children or vulnerable people. And we're not prosecuting enough people. In London in 2023, there were over 10,000 rape, assault reports, but only 1,400 arrests. So something's going wrong, and there's a massive backlog in the system for prosecutions. But the interesting thing for me is we've heard a lot recently that the police system, or there's been an accusation that the police system is two-tier or it's woke. And if you're a foreigner, you're less likely to be prosecuted. Actually, these statistics tell us if you're a foreigner, you're 3 times more likely to be prosecuted.
Well, hang on. It also could tell us that you're 3 times more likely to commit that offence.
Well, it's telling you how many people have been arrested. It's not telling you how many offences have been taking place. So it could tell either way. It depends on which way you want to interpret it. When we look at other statistics, for example, that in London, you're 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're black then if you're white, that tells us there's something going wrong in policing, doesn't it? So it could be, and that's
does
the problem
that tell
with
us
these
that there's
statistics.
something going wrong in policing? Because the police always say, when that statistic is put out, they say that the hit rate, for want of a better term, for stop and search is precisely equal between white Londoners and black Londoners. That is, for the proportion of stop and searches that find a knife or drugs or something or whatever is entirely proportional, even though proportionally more black people are stopped and searched.
Which is odd, isn't it? You're more likely to be stopped and searched. There are less black people than white people in London. So statistics
the hit rate is exactly the
notoriously
same.
complicated to interpret, aren't they?
I think we're ignoring the point here, though, because we've got a little chart here. And yes, you are absolutely right to point out that this is arrests, not convictions, this data. So there may well be some of these arrests don't end up being, convicted of that crime. They may well be innocent. But if you look at this, arrests per 1,000 of the population, Albania is at the top. 210 arrests per 1,000 people. I mean, that is crazy. Then you've got Afghanistan, Iraq, Algeria, Congo, Morocco, Somalia, and it goes on. There's a problem there, isn't there?
Well, when it comes to Albanians, our government, previous government and this current government have got a very clear system now that if you commit a crime, you're from Albania, you will be returned. And that's something they're trying to institute right across the board here. But look, I'm worried that we are increasingly weaponizing statistics to focus on immigrants. And this is a really interesting study produced by a think tank that is anti-immigrant, is trying to reduce the number of immigrations to the UK. So it's a little bit like an oil company telling us that fossil fuels don't really cause global warming.
Well, only if the data is false. Only if the data is false, and we don't have any reason to believe that it is, because it appears to come from the ONS, the Office for National Statistics.
It's an interpretation of the data.
You could shoot the messenger, but if the facts are the facts, then there's an issue.
It's an interpretation of the data. That's what we're saying, isn't it? That we don't know whether there is a bias in our police to prosecute people who are foreign, and we don't know whether those are, as you say, convictions or you've just been arrested. So it's a little snapshot, and I'm not quite sure what it tells us.
So do you think the police are prejudiced against Albanians?
It could be, looking at the data, that there might be a prejudice towards prosecuting people who appear foreign.
OK, well, Krish Kandia, thank you very much indeed. You're from the Sanctuary Foundation. Thank you very much. Till next time.
Thank you.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and please do stay with us, because next we'll be speaking to the man responsible for launching that petition calling for a general election. It's soared in a very short space of time, over 3 million backers. It's being debated in Parliament today, so that's to come and much more after your headlines with Sophia Hill.
Thank you, Tom and Emily. Very good afternoon. It's just gone 12:30, and here are your latest headlines from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has defended his position as Director of Public Prosecutions, saying child exploitation is utterly sickening, and it was something he had tackled head-on in his role. The Prime Minister also hit back at Musk over his comments on Twitter that claimed Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips is an evil witch and deserved to be in jail. Sir Keir Starmer also accused opposition politicians of amplifying what the far right is saying on child sexual abuse after failing to act for 14 long years.
Victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously.
Commenting on the criticism of Jess Phillips, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, had dedicated her career to tackling sexual violence and abuse and to being a voice for victims and survivors of the most terrible crimes, including sexual child abuse. She has worked with whistleblowers and campaigned tirelessly for justice for those let down badly by endemic institutional failure. Meanwhile, also this morning, Sir Keir Starmer pledged to reduce NHS waiting lists, saying we need to reform the NHS from top to bottom and that he would fight for the NHS day and night. The Prime Minister has called for more convenience for patients and said that no institution is more important to the security of the country than the NHS. And a man has been charged with assisting former soldier Daniel Khalife after he escaped from prison. Daniel Khalife was found guilty of spying for Iran after a trial in November last year and admitted to escaping from HMP Wandsworth. Imran Chowdhury, a 25-year-old from north-east London, has been charged with one count of assisting an escaped prisoner and will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court tomorrow. And weather warnings persisted across the country this morning as many commuters suffered disruptions during their commute. Major roads have been closed, railway lines were blocked, and Manchester Airport's runways were closed early on this morning because of the heavy snow, but have since reopened. This all comes after most of the UK saw heavy snow or icy rainfall over the weekend, and we even reached the coldest temperature of the winter so far at minus 13.3 degrees. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'll be back in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The wintry weather continues, warnings remain in place, and flood warnings are also now across much of the UK because it's been so wet recently from this area of low pressure. It is heading out into the North Sea. Lots of isobars on the chart telling us it's windy out there, and that wind is feeling particularly cold. The rain and snow in eastern England, that is though clearing away, so turning a bit drier here. Further showers further west, chiefly of rain. Some snow over the hills, certainly further snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. That brisk wind bringing the chill. Temperature actually falling this afternoon across the southeast, generally 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius, but everywhere feels colder because of that strong wind, which will continue to bring a mixture of rain, sleet and snow showers into Northern Ireland. Small snow showers packing into northern Scotland. Could be very icy as we go through the evening as temperatures tumble back down to freezing with those snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. A mix of rain, sleet and snow across Northern Ireland, but we could see a further covering in places and again likely to be icy here. Same goes for Wales. We could see a further few centimetres of snow, particularly over hills, but even some down to low levels, and we'll see a few flurries across the southeast. So again, potentially very icy as we go through the night, and we see these showers continuing to feed in, making for some very slippery conditions. Much of the east will stay dry overnight, and we will see those temperatures again widely falling down to or a few degrees below freezing. Rural spots many degrees below freezing. So a bit of a mishmash through the night and into the morning. Again, potentially very icy for Tuesday morning's commute. I think many places will be dry and bright through Tuesday. There'll still be some showers coming into Northern Ireland, northwest England. Again, chiefly of rain at low levels, but some snow on the hills. Wintry showers in northern Scotland. Much of the south and east dry and sunny tomorrow, but still feeling cold.
The latest GB News travel.
Southbound on the A1M, queue in traffic to an earlier accident just before junction 47. Northbound on the M1, there is a lane closure to flooding from junction 24 for Nottingham South and the East Midlands Airport to 25 for Nottingham and Derby. Traffic is coping well. Anti-clockwise on the M25, there is now a closure causing long delays. It's due to fuel spillage and an earlier jackknife lorry from Leatherhead at 9 through to Reigate at junction 8. Eastbound on the M50, there is now a block at junction 24 for Ledbury. That is due to flooding, very slow as a result. And finally, the southbound side of the M53, that is now closed whilst emergency repairs take place. That's at junction 7 for Overpool. And that's the very latest travel update.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past midday. And today, Parliament will debate a petition calling for a fresh general election after that famous petition skyrocketed over 3 million signatures in just a few weeks.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. The petition was launched following a backlash to the government's October budget and also the cutting of the winter fuel allowance.
Well, delighted to be joined in the studio now by the man who launched that petition, Michael Westwood. Michael, thanks so much for being here in the studio on your way to Parliament, I hear,
yes,
for the debate today.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, going down to watch it later. Starts at 4:30, and I've been told to expect it last the full 3 hours. So yeah, looking forward to it.
So there are a lot of MPs that have signed up to have their say.
I'd imagine so, yeah. The feedback I had when I spoke to MP James Stone, who's going to be hosting it, he said there will be a lot of interest in it. And I've had a lot of media coverage over the last 24 hours as well. So, yeah, I'm expecting a decent turnout.
Now, of course, when you started this petition, I can't imagine that you thought it would, reach the 100,000 line for the petition, let alone millions upon millions of people.
Yeah, no, not something I expected at all, to be truthful. I sent it out there in hope that it... Obviously, when you do anything in life, you hope it goes the best it possibly can. And I think this has probably gone as best it possibly can, to be truthful.
Yeah, and it's fantastic that you've also become a spokesperson for your own petition. You haven't hidden in the, in the shadows. You're willing to come on and speak about it. So what is it that actually got to you so much about Keir Starmer so early on? Why did you launch this petition? Early on, I wasn't too fussed when he first got into power. I've made it quite clear I've voted Conservative. But when the election come round, and when he got into power, it was a case of, right, OK, he's got in, let's see what he can do, and let's hope he delivers for the country. Then, since the moment he got into power, it was all doom and gloom, very much negative about how the country is, no money to spend. Well, that gets into people's heads, and they stop spending what money they have got. And then they released the budget, and then with the NI changes, increasing the minimum wage, which is great for some people. But the realistic term of that is, like it's been reported yesterday, over 200,000 redundancies this year expected off the back of it.
Yeah.
Small companies just can't afford it. So, as a businessman, I had to sit back and look and thought, you know what, this is disastrous. He was going to say something, and that's when I googled how to get rid of the Prime Minister, and one thing snowballing, and then we're here today. Oh, so really, you googled how to get rid of the Prime Minister? That's as simple as what it was.
Amazing.
And the first thing that come up wasn't appropriate, so we went for the second option, which was the correct option. And,
oh gosh, I won't ask for the first.
Probably not worthwhile for daytime television anyway. No. But you don't have a political background at all. You've been in business. You say you voted Conservative at the last election, but you've never been involved in any sort of organisation.
No, not at all. All I am is probably too opinionated. Like to put my 2 penny worth in, and yeah, and that's where it's got me to today. I'm not sitting for any political party. I appreciate the support of anybody out there that's supporting this petition. Nigel Farage has wished me all the best for today. So I'm not sitting here for any particular party. I'm sitting here as a working class man saying I'm sick of the politicians in general, not just Labour, telling us a bunch of lies just to gain power. And sitting here today, I said things have got to change, and that's what I said a few weeks ago, and so the same today. Well, this was the thing. I mean, the government said, Keir Starmer said, we're not going to put any of this tax burden on working people. But we've been around the country speaking to small business people who say, well, hang on, am I not a working person? Yeah. Am I not feeling the burden? And you're feeling the burden of all those extra taxes. Yeah. Just tell us what exactly you do. Obviously, I've got a wholesale company, so I sell kegs of beer across the West Midlands. We do a same-day delivery service called the Ginger Beer Company. That's basically the main stream of what we do, and off the back of that, we've then got some pubs and sell beer as cheap as we physically can in those places. But the tax, like I said, the tax implications of that is looking to grow a small business like mine is. You sit back and look and think, OK, if I have to take somebody else on next year, it's the more NI, the fact that I'm reducing the business rate relief. It's just always more and more hitting the smaller businesses. And it's going to get to a point where people like myself and the thousands of other people out there that have got small businesses are just going to stop doing it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you do run the cheapest pub in Britain. Apparently so. Apparently so. So how cheap can you get pints in your pub? We're looking at £2.30 a pint at the moment. That's you're looking for your main brand products. Yeah, £2.30. Yeah. I've got to ask though. I mean, if you're looking at staffing this pub, getting stuff in, heating the pub, the energy bills, all the rest of it. I mean, if all of these elements, the cost of your employees, the cost of your energy, the tax that you pay as a business, if they're all going up, will you be able to keep your pints at £2.30? I'm hoping my best. I'm trying to deal with different breweries, etc., trying to get things in place where we can keep it as cheap as possible. But the realistic is, they come out in the budget, we've dropped a penny off a pint. Let's talk serious. You're putting it up 30p, 35p, 40p, because, like I said, you've got the business rate reductions, you've got the NI hikes, you've got the electric and the gas going through the roof. Oh, for the pub, it's phenomenal how much you pay on electric and gas. You're the sort of person that, the Labour Party should be,
supporting, not alienating.
Well.
But thank you very much for coming in, and I hope you enjoy the debate. I don't know if it will lead to a general election, but at least you'll feel like your views being
Just
heard.
quickly, what do you say to those that say, this is a very, very silly petition, it's not going to bring about a general election, there are 420-odd Labour MPs in Parliament, you're not going to convince them to vote for a general election, it's a completely pointless exercise?
Well, as we've seen, some of the local Labour governors are walking out on Labour. Some of the MPs will soon follow suit as well. Before you know it, I do believe there will be another general election called, or Sir Keir Starmer will not be leading the Labour Party anymore.
Goodness me.
Well, there you go. Strong stuff. Michael Westwood, thank you very much indeed. You launched the petition that's going to be debated a little bit later on in Parliament. Over 3 million signatures.
Now, I have to say, in response to this general election petition, the government has issued this statement. This government was elected on a mandate of change at the July 2024 general election. Our full focus is on fixing the foundations, rebuilding Britain and restoring public confidence in government.
OK, well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Coming up, we are going to head to Manchester to see some of the widespread disruption caused by the snowstorms over the weekend. I've heard our reporter is very freezing indeed. That's next.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Britain's Royal Collection of Art is one of the most important and largest in the world. And it's also one of the last great European royal collections to remain intact. And built up over many centuries, it has extraordinary depth. And curators have delved into its riches to produce an exhibition of Italian drawings between 1450 and 1600. There are household names here: Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. Some of the drawings are complete works in themselves. Some are studies for images that would appear in much larger pieces. And some are anatomical studies which enabled these artists to draw the human form in all its perfection.
This is the earliest drawing in the exhibition of around 1450, and it's made by Fra Angelico, the great Florentine painter. It may seem an obvious thing to say, but we only have drawings like this if they have survived. And these drawings were not seen at the time as works of art. They were workshop studies. They were as functional as a hammer or a paintbrush, if you like, in the workshop. But the fact that a drawing would survive from 1450 to the present day shows that first it was useful, and it was a work that would have been referred to constantly in the artist's studio, and only later was it valued by collectors as an exemplar of the artist's genius, if you like, the way in which we might think of it today. So a drawing like this, which is in almost perfect condition, has got a history of being valued for different reasons from when it was produced to the present.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 12:49. Now, yes, the weather warnings do persist across the country today. Commuters are suffering from the travel disruption due to severe rain and snow, of course.
Yeah, several major roads have been closed and railway lines across the northern regions of the country remain blocked. Meanwhile...
Meanwhile... in unison. Over 100 major flood warnings have been issued in England, with another 300 minor warning issues for the rest of the country. You would have thought by now we'd be able to, work out which one of us speaks. But,
shall we do this one in unison as well? That might be a bit far.
Introduce Sophie Reaper.
OK, joining us from Manchester Airport is our reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, please shut us up and tell us what's going on in Manchester.
Oh. Well, we've moved to Bolton, to Winter Hill, Tom and Emily, where the snow is still lying very, very thick on the ground. You can see here behind me, you can actually see in the distance the city of Manchester, where, as you say, the airport was closed for a second day in a row this morning. It was only for around 45 minutes that they closed the runways because of heavy snow, and then it reopened. But that has caused major disruption. Now, I can tell you that the temperature here itself is hovering just above freezing, but the thermostat is saying that it feels around -6. And I think that both my cameraman and I can attest to that. It is absolutely perishing. It's Winter Hill by name and it is Winter Hill by nature. It is absolutely freezing up here. And although it may look very, very beautiful, the scene here behind us, as you say, it has caused absolute travel chaos today, as it always does when we face weather conditions like this here in the United Kingdom. We've seen major roads closed due to snow and due to flooding. We've seen many rail services offering reduced services as a result of these conditions. As I say, Manchester Airport closing the runway this morning for a brief period for the second day in a row. This is something that we're seeing all over the UK, and it's also set to continue. In the last hour or so, the Met Office has reissued weather warnings for snow and ice, that yellow weather warning in place now in Northern Ireland, for large parts of Scotland and large parts of England and Wales. That's lasting now until tomorrow, so that warning in place for snow and ice. The advice, of course, for people to take care if they're out and about, and realistically to just try and stay indoors where possible. Certainly stay indoors if you're living near here, because I can warn you, it is absolutely freezing. So unless you've got your thermals on, stay indoors when you can.
And I suppose those all-important yellow snow warnings to avoid all of that yellow snow.
That's always sound advice, Tom, always sound advice.
What are you talking about?
It's common knowledge, that, common knowledge.
I mean, Sophie, just what is the temperature there, do you reckon? Or is it more the wind chill factor that's getting you?
You know what? Standing in this snow, I'm very grateful for my thick socks and my wellies, because it is freezing when you're out here. It's around 0-1 degree, but it feels a lot lower. Like I say, the thermostat's saying -6. So, not the nicest temperature, and I must say I'm very jealous of you two in that warm studio.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm feeling very privileged sat here while you're out there in the cold wind. But I love the earmuffs. We'll speak to you a little bit later on. Stay warm as well, as best you can. Sophie Reaper there, reporting on the rather chilly weather, and it does look like it's set to continue for a little bit.
Certainly does, and particularly how it affects transport. Because I do think it is as you say, really nice to sit here in this warm studio and look at the picturesque landscapes and think,
oh, it's stunning.
Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it stunning looking down that hill over Manchester? I mean, glorious views. But for people trying to get from A to B, perhaps not so glorious.
Well, if you are at home and you have nowhere to go and you're watching or listening to us, and it's snowing where you are, why not get in touch and show us your beautiful landscape? Because much of the country is looking like that today.
Yeah.
Which is rather nice. We don't always get snow, do we?
No.
Some winters, there's not much.
I was of the impression that we usually got snow a lot later in the year these days. I mean, I'm more likely to get a white Easter than a white Christmas, but it's sort of nice to get it in this time of year. It sort of feels more traditional in a way.
It does feel rather traditional, although it was a very mild and drizzly Christmas day, wasn't it? Yeah. Just on our previous guest, Michael Westwood, who launched this petition that's going to be debated today, calling for a general election. 3 million signatures, quite extraordinary. Gwyn says, good luck, Michael, you speak for the majority of Britain. Lots of people saying that he was a fantastic guest to have on. Bill asking for 4 pints of Guinness, please. Well, that would be £10.20.
Quick maths. Well, do send in your pictures of the areas around you, if indeed it's beautiful. Or,
yeah, not if it's just raining.
Or even if it's not. I mean, dreary pictures are accepted too. All options here at GB News. This is Good Afternoon Britain. Do stay with us. Plenty more to come, including Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, defending the government's handling of the grooming gang scandal. That's next.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The wintry weather continues, warnings remain in place, and flood warnings are also now across much of the UK because it's been so wet recently from this area of low pressure. It is heading out into the North Sea. Lots of isobars on the chart telling us it's windy out there, and that wind is feeling particularly cold. The rain and snow in eastern England, that is though clearing away, so turning a bit drier here. Further showers further west, chiefly of rain. Some snow over the hills, certainly further snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. That brisk wind bringing the chill. Temperature actually falling this afternoon across the southeast, generally 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius, but everywhere feels colder because of that strong wind, which will continue to bring a mixture of rain, sleet and snow showers into Northern Ireland. Small snow showers packing into northern Scotland. Could be very icy as we go through the evening as temperatures tumble back down to freezing with those snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. A mix of rain, sleet and snow across Northern Ireland, but we could see a further covering in places, and again, likely to be icy here. Same goes for Wales. We could see a further few centimetres of snow, particularly over hills, but even some down to low levels, and we'll see a few flurries across the southeast. So again, potentially very icy as we go through the night, and we see these showers continuing to feed in, making for some very slippery conditions. Much of the east will stay dry overnight, and we will see those temperatures again widely falling down to or a few degrees below freezing. Rural spots many degrees below freezing. So a bit of a mishmash through the night and into the morning. Again, potentially very icy for Tuesday morning's commute. I think many places will be dry and bright through Tuesday. There'll still be some showers coming into Northern Ireland, northwest England. Again, chiefly of rain at low levels, but some snow on the hills. Wintry showers in northern Scotland. Much of the south and east dry and sunny tomorrow, but still feeling cold.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Imagine how £50,000 in cash from us could make your new year go with a bang. From treats to holidays to fun times with the family, a totally tax-free £50,000 in cash could make you feel alive in 2025. And just one entry into the Great British Giveaway really could make £50,000 cash all yours. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So maybe people are opting for the more traditional ways of meeting people.
Organically.
Meeting organically.
The only way to actually... Well, I know some people have
it's worked very well for some people. I mean, I personally think that doing things more organically is probably going to be better, or it's more to my taste. But it has worked well for lots of people.
So I absolutely agree. There's a very interesting young woman, she's about 22, who writes on this and has a podcast called Freya India.
And she talks about this dating industry, and she said all she ever wanted to do as a teenager was go down the pub and meet a man and fall in love. And the dating apps just don't do that. And she said they've become so, you know, it's just literally people looking for sex. You know, we need to get back to traditional ways of meeting face to face, but we also need to stop toxifying it. You know, a man flirting with a woman is not toxic. Men and women have done this for years. Obviously, you know, we need to know about boundaries, but we also need to allow men and women to do what comes naturally.
I think it's also about spontaneity in society. It's much harder to, you know, just randomly go out in an evening in London and not know what you're doing and have a good time than it was, I think, you know, 15 years ago or so.
Yeah,
and if you don't have spontaneity in your life in general terms, then that spontaneous meeting with someone is less likely to
Also, I think it's also where you are, because I was just thinking, as you said, that London, going out to try and meet someone in London is one thing. If you live in a small town and you go down your local pub, there's probably you're more likely to meet someone that you get to know over a period of time. And
but this is also why we need to support our pubs and our hospitality areas, because they are important social integrators. They really are.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Monday, the 6th of January. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
More horrific developments from the ongoing grooming gangs scandal as new reports reveal that civil servants delayed attempts to secure compensation for victims.
The Prime Minister, however, says there are too many people jumping on the far-right bandwagon, and misinformation is inflicting more damage on the victims.
The victims here suffered terrible abuse. Unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to.
And the scandal has also divided the Reform Party as Elon Musk calls for Nigel Farage to be replaced as leader, saying he's not up to the task. Will Musk's comments split their supporter base in two?
And from frost to floods, the Met Office warns that the heavy snowfall from the weekend could now lead to widespread flooding, particularly in northern regions of the country. Do let us know if you're affected.
Looks like Keir Starmer has been particularly introspective over his trip to Madeira. Had a few days out, and he's come back and suggested that anyone, or at least politicians who are calling for a national inquiry, must be jumping on the far-right bandwagon. OK.
I think it's really unfortunate phrasing there. I mean,
he means it, though.
I think he's got a bit of a blind spot here. It's true that there are some far-right people who have alighted on this issue and are trying to, you know, divide different ethnic groups over it. But then there's literally everyone else. A vast, vast array, a coalition of all parties and none, of people who have simply looked at the issue and said, hang on, stop, look, there is a specific problem in specific towns of people from a specific ethnic background doing a specific thing.
Yeah, and there's also the fact that, unfortunately, many of the towns and cities affected are under Labour control. And therefore, there will be questions about those Labour councils or those officials, those local authorities that were under Labour control as to whether they turned a blind eye. We're also going to be talking to an MP in a little bit who held a debate on this very issue. And how many people from the opposition, how many people from the Labour Party at the time turned up for that debate on grooming gangs?
Just one.
Just one. So there you go. Maybe that's the blind spot here.
But that's all to come. Do send in your views and post your comments. Visit us at gbnews.com/yoursay to get involved. All to come, of course, after your latest news headlines with Sophia.
Thank you, Tom and Emily. Very good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. Here are your latest headlines from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has defended his position as Director of Public Prosecutions, saying child sexual exploitation is utterly sickening, and it was something he had tackled head-on whilst in that role. The Prime Minister also hit back at Musk over his comments on Twitter that claimed Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips is an evil witch and deserved to be in jail, Sir Keir Starmer went on to accuse opposition politicians of amplifying what the far right is saying on child sexual abuse after failing to act for 14 long years.
Victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously.
Commenting on criticism of Jess Phillips, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has said, Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, has dedicated her career to tackling sexual violence and abuse and to being a voice for victims and survivors of the most terrible crimes, including child sexual abuse. She's worked with whistleblowers and campaigned tirelessly for justice for those badly let down by endemic institutional failure. Meanwhile, this morning, the Prime Minister pledged to reduce NHS waiting lists, saying we need to reform the NHS from top to bottom, and saying that he would fight for the NHS day and night. The Prime Minister has called for more convenience for patients and said that no institution is more important to the security of the country than the NHS. And a debate will be held this afternoon at 4:30 in Parliament on the petition calling for a general election. The petition has secured more than 2.5 million signatures after being launched by a West Midlands publican. This is the third most popular e-petition since 2010, after easily surpassing the required 100,000 signatures required for a debate to take place. GB News spoke to the petition's founder, Michael Westwood, a little while ago about his expectations.
Something I expected us all to be cheerful. I sensed out there in hope that obviously, when you do anything in life, you hope it goes the best it possibly can. And I think this has probably gone as best it possibly can, to be truthful.
And today is Justin Welby's final day as the Archbishop of Canterbury, as he prepares to step down over failures in handling a Church of England abuse scandal. Almost 2 months after announcing his resignation, he will officially quit the role at midnight tonight. It follows an independent review concluding that John Smith, a barrister and Christian camp leader, might have been brought to justice if Archbishop Welby had reported him to the police in 2013. The Archbishop has made few public appearances since mid-November and did not give the traditional Christmas Day sermon from Canterbury Cathedral. And weather warnings persisted across the country this morning as many commuters suffered travel disruption from severe weather. Major roads were closed, railway lines blocked, and Manchester Airport's runways were closed early on this morning because of heavy snow, but have since reopened. Travel disruptions are predominantly due to flooding from thawing snow and heavy rain. This comes after most of the UK saw heavy snow or icy rainfall over the weekend, and we even saw the coldest night of the winter so far at minus 13.3 degrees. And it's the start of ceremony season as the Golden Globes took place last night. British stars Hugh Grant and Cynthia Erivo were among the nominees, but Hollywood stars Demi Moore and Sebastian Stan took home the wins for Best Actress and Actor in the musical or comedy category. The hit musical Wicked and limited series Baby Reindeer were also among key winners of the night, but fans mainly praised Nikki Glaser for her masterclass hosting performance. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More in half an hour, but now it's back to Emily and Tom.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 7 minutes past 1. And are politicians calling for an inquiry into grooming gangs simply jumping on a bandwagon of the far right? Well, that's the claim apparently made by Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, when he spoke to reporters earlier.
Well, he also appeared to accuse Elon Musk of spreading lies, claiming that many of those calling for an inquiry are not interested in the victims, only themselves.
It is something about the nature of our politics, because once we lose the anchor that truth matters in the robust debate we must have, then we're on a very slippery slope. And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts. And that's why this is actually an important point about our politics, not about what anybody may or may not say on Twitter. That actually isn't the main issue. The main issue is what are politicians here doing to stand up for the things that matter to our democracy and the way that we have robust debate. That's why I want to call this out.
OK, that's what Keir Starmer had to say a little bit earlier during his press conference that was supposed to be all about the NHS. But grooming gangs, the row with Elon Musk certainly came front and centre. Charlie Peters, our national reporter who's been investigating this issue, joins us live from Greater Manchester. Now, Charlie, just explain why you are where you are today.
Well, good afternoon, Tom and Emily. Well, I'll be across the country this week covering the grooming gang scandal, as GB News has done from the very start of the channel's launch. And we're doing so because of the renewed focus on this issue and all of the survivors who are coming out to talk about the crisis. Now, I'm in Tameside this afternoon, which is in Greater Manchester, where local councillors have been campaigning for many years for more action on child sexual exploitation to take place in this borough. It's between Rochdale and Oldham. It's in an area where they say there has been no sufficient local investigation or indeed any government investigation into the crisis. Now, this comes as Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is resisting calls from the opposition and indeed from Elon Musk for a national public inquiry to once and for all aggressively review all of the occasions where this scandal has taken place. At GB News, we've uncovered over 50 towns and cities where we believe there are credible reports of gangs or sufficient legal and prosecution data to show that this very specific form of child sexual exploitation has taken place. Now, the government is saying that they have the independent inquiry to child sexual abuse, so they don't need another national inquiry. But many campaigners and survivors have told GB News that the ICSA report was a sham. It only looked at a handful of locations, 6 of them. Only one of them had any previous credible reports of grooming gangs. There are 49, at least, other towns and cities that they say need serious investigation. Well, here in Tameside earlier today, I spoke to a councillor, Liam Billington, about his campaign for more action here in Greater Manchester on the grooming gang scandal. Liam, we've heard Starmer there just saying that the time for reviews is over, we need action. What's your response?
Well, I agree with what you just said. You know, where is the accountability for those victims which have had really serious miscarriages of justice on this, where it has been swept under the carpet? There are people that do need to face real actions on this, whether it be police, the councils and these perpetrators themselves who have carried out these heinous crimes. But what I would say is, just listening to you there on Keir Starmer, again, the tone what he's setting is blaming the far right and misinformation is exactly the same what we heard over the Southport stabbings, and I think he's trying to whip up hatred again.
I have to say the reaction I've had from many survivors since Sir Keir Starmer gave that press conference has been extremely severe, and they're all pointing towards what you two have been discussing in the studio, that reference to the far right and jumping on a bandwagon. They are so grateful, these survivors of this appalling, horrific travesty in our history, that people are speaking out about it again. They are so grateful that people are campaigning on their behalf, talking about what's happened and calling for more action to investigate this appalling stain on British history. I have to say, they're very angry at the claim that those doing so are jumping on a far-right bandwagon. They say now is the time to finally push for that aggressive national inquiry that goes specifically onto the grooming gang scandal and is not what they say was a sham and a cover-up in the ICSA report that just didn't look into it sufficiently, barely at all. So that's what they're calling for now, and I think putting the survivors and their voices at the heart of this discussion is vital. Indeed, that's what the Prime Minister said he wanted to do.
I'm not surprised they're very angry. Charlie Peters, thank you so much and for the work you're doing. We'll catch up with you a little later on in the programme. Now, we should say that a government spokesperson from the Home Office has issued the following statement. No child should ever suffer sexual abuse or exploitation, and it is paramount we do more to protect vulnerable children, which is why we are working at pace across government to drive forward real action to implement the recommendations of the independent inquiry into child sex abuse. But again, it's that inquiry that people are saying is simply not adequate and does not focus entirely well, even primarily,
No.
on the issue of grooming gangs, which is a specific issue of sexual exploitation.
Just one subsection of that report. Well, one MP who has been campaigning on this specific issue for years is Robbie Moore, the Member of Parliament for Keighley. In 2021, he called a parliamentary debate in the Chamber of the House of Commons to expose the rape gang scandal in Keighley and Bradford. But only one Labour MP turned up to hear it.
So let's call this problem out for what it is. Predominantly, a small minority of largely Pakistani Muslim men in West Yorkshire, including, I am sad to say, in Keighley and across the Bradford district, that have been sexually exploiting young children for far too long. You know, this is one of the most important debates that we have to be having in this House. And look at the other side. This is the only member that has turned up to this debate, and I think that shows volumes. And I thank you very much for coming along.
Yes, well, Robbie has been campaigning for a full rape gang inquiry since he was first elected 6 years ago, raising the issue more than 40 times over nearly 20 different parliamentary debates.
Delighted to say that Robbie Moore MP joins us in the studio now. And, of course, this has been something that affects your patch in particular. How do you feel now that this is becoming such a national conversation when you were almost a lone voice banging on about this 6 odd years ago?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly frustrated, actually, that it has taken so long to get this amount of national attention. You know, I have very robustly, since being elected in 2019, called this issue out exactly for what it is, a minority of Pakistani Muslim men that has been specifically targeting young children for far too long. And quite rightly, the wider Pakistani community are outraged that they're all being effectively branded within the same category. And that's why we need a national inquiry that deals with these complexities that, unfortunately, constituents of mine in Keighley and across the wider Bradford district have dealt with and had to deal with for far too long. And let's remember, Tom, it was Anne Cryer, who was a Labour MP, who was previously the Keighley Member of Parliament, that called this issue out over 20 decades ago. And consistently, the British state has failed many of those families, many of those victims, many of those survivors, consistently for far too long. And we now need to get to grips with this issue and deal with it incredibly strongly.
And this is the thing, there have been Labour MPs who have spoken out about this issue and got quite short shrift. That have been told to get back in their box on this issue.
Well, Sarah Champion was the one MP that turned up for the debate that I held on child sexual exploitation. She's the Member of Parliament for Rotherham and has robustly spoken out on this issue. But what we have seen since this Charlie Peters has done this report over the last few weeks, and it has had such national profile, is not one Labour MP has come out and spoken against this. In fact, we've seen Jess Phillips, who should be in charge of children's safeguarding, decline a request from a local authority for a national...
What do you make of Keir Starmer's defence of Jess Phillips? Because in his press conference today, he said, I'm proud to call a colleague and a friend. Jess Phillips has done 1,000 times more than they have even dreamt about when it comes to protecting victims of sexual abuse throughout her entire career. So he's adamant that Jess Phillips, you know, has no responsibility here or has made no failure here.
The Prime Minister is weak on this issue. He looked nervous when he was responding to the questions at the press conference earlier on, and is clearly wanting to shy away from the very fact of the complexities that have haunted communities like Keighley, like the Bradford district. You know, the ICSA report that was done was fairly detailed, but yet it mentioned Rotherham once. It didn't even mention the word Bradford at all in that report. So what I would like to see is those recommendations put in full, but I would also like to see a full inquiry that looks at the ethnicity, that looks at the challenges around this, so that we can properly get to grips with the gang-related grooming that has taken place for far too long.
And yet, does your party not hold some responsibility here too? That inquiry that went on for years, cost tens of millions of pounds to deliver, was set up by Theresa May in 2014. Now, as you say, it didn't mention your area. It barely touched upon the specific issue of grooming, and it's now being used by politicians across the board to say, oh, look, There's been an inquiry, we've looked into this, when actually this was an inquiry that looked at the Catholic Church, it looked at Jimmy Savile, it looked at all sorts of different child exploitation. Only one subsection of it was to do with this specific grooming gang issue.
Mm-hmm. And that's specifically why we need that absolutely detailed, dedicated national inquiry that focuses on areas like the Bradford district that I've been campaigning on since getting elected in 2019, to have that level of scrutiny, to deal with the complexities around ethnicity, that looks at the challenges associated when it is a minority of Pakistani men that have been targeting young children, and that we can then get some recompense, we can provide reassurance to those victims and survivors so they do not feel disenfranchised by the state. And yes, I am quite robust in saying it is the British state that has failed consecutively, regardless of who's been in power for far too long. Under the Sunak administration, we quite rightly brought out a dedicated task force. We quite rightly allocated attention to collecting the ethnicity around data. But significantly, we have, and consecutively over a number of years, we have not gone far enough, and there needs to be convictions and criminal convictions that are associated with this. Anyone who has got involved with covering up, sweeping this issue under the carpet, or not helping the robustness of this needs to also face criminal prosecution, as far as I'm concerned.
Keir Starmer's time as chief prosecutor needs to be investigated as well.
Well, what's clear is he did not go far enough. He was in a prominent role to be able to deal with this issue, and he did not go far enough. And even in his press conference today, he looked weak, he looked nervous, he was not being robust enough, he was not showing the strength of a Prime Minister that we should all be expecting. And that, I am sad to say, is incredibly frustrating when, really, this should not be a political issue. This should be dealing with the absolute issue for those survivors.
Well, I hope if your debate that took place in 2021 was today, that more MPs would turn up. Thank you very much indeed, Robbie Moore, MP for Keighley.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and up next, we're going to hear from the Prime Minister as he calls out Elon Musk for spreading what he calls far-right misinformation.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Our next guest has a rather unique career story. She was working at a pub aged 18 and Holly Farmer was spotted by a modelling scout, and it turned out to be her lucky day.
Scott Yos Clark sent this message to Holly.
Holly, 18, 5'10", she does not belong in a pub. And I absolutely love that, Holly, because it's a bit like Dirty Dancing, where it's like, you can't put baby in the corner. Holly does not belong in a pub. You belong on the catwalk. What was that moment like for you when you were scouted by Yoz?
It was crazy. I have to say I wasn't expecting it, to be honest. Like, I was just on my lunch break. I was working at a pub, so... I was on my lunch break walking, going to Primark and...
You're going to Primark?
Got stopped by yours.
How did that interaction go?
Well, first question was, how tall are you? So, 5'10".
Very much that.
Yeah, then he gave me his card and explained everything, that he's a model scout, obviously.
Yeah, because generally when I scout, especially when I get close to that person, I tend to look in their eyes, and when you see something there, it's like everything works on the face, and then the eyes gives you away.
Well, you've spotted a gem in Holly. I mean, you can tell even when you walked in, you are built to be a model.
I did my first fashion week here in London and then went to Paris, and it was really fun. Wow. Now it's my full-time job. It's a bit crazy, to be honest.
Wow.
To be able to say that modelling is my full-time job now. Some brands will ask you to be a bit more serious, and then others not.
So it depends on the client's request as well. Ellie, give us your best model face. Ready? 3. I wonder if we can come back. 3, 2, 1. Very nice.
High fashion.
Yeah.
But you guys do all contorted moves, don't you?
Yeah.
Like all this high fashion. Do yours?
I'm just permanently living in model
You actually
model
are,
world.
though. He actually
this
does.
is it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Thank you, Britain.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for subscribing.
Thank you for your support.
It's you that make us the People's Channel.
As we reflect on our journey so far, we're filled with immense gratitude.
You mean the world to us. We couldn't have reached this point without you.
As a very special thank you, we are giving you the chance to win one of 50 GB News thank you boxes. They're worth £50 each.
For full terms and conditions, and to enter, just go to gbnews.com/thank you.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 23 minutes past 1. And back to the Prime Minister, responding to those concerns around the growing grooming gang scandal. Well, Sir Keir Starmer responded to Elon Musk, who claimed that the safeguarding minister, Jess Phillips, was a rape genocide apologist and should be put in prison.
Critics will say it's not a far-right bandwagon issue, Prime Minister. The ICSA report looked at just 6 towns where grooming gangs were operating. Rochdale got 1 mention in 400 pages. We have found at GB News court report showing gangs operating in 50 towns across the country. Are you certain, as Prime Minister, it's not going on today? Why don't you order a national public inquiry to join the dots between 50 towns, not 6, barely mentioned in the J report? Are you afraid it might expose failings as your role as a DPP? And that's why Elon Musk says, were you complicit in the rape of Britain? You have not... to go after the far right on this does not go to the heart of the problem.
No. Look, Chris, look, on my record, I think you were actually covering crime when I was DPP. You were quizzing me at the time. I've set out what I did. I actually changed the system because I could see some of the things that were going wrong. I wasn't prepared. Unlike, some Tory politicians, I'm not tweeting about it or talking about it. I got on with changing it. In relation to the serious point you do make, because, this is... the victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously.
OK, so there's Christopher Hope putting that question to Keir Starmer. Shall we speak to Christopher Hope himself? Christopher, a very good question to Keir Starmer there. The use of the jumping on the bandwagon of the far right for politicians who are calling for a national inquiry, was that a misstep?
Yes, Emily and Tom, hi. Yeah, I'm back from Surrey where we put those questions in a hospital setting, but about this child grooming scandal, which we are covering in depth at GB News through the reporting of Charlie Peters, of course. It may be a misstep. It reminds me very much of when he attacked the far right for those concerns about immigration back in August. That doesn't quite... by attacking those upset about something on the fringes, they are ignoring the majority who are upset about this kind of thing. I don't know why he chose to do that. He made the point, which is right, that the Baroness Alexis J report, none of those recommendations have yet been implemented. He says they will be under his government. He said the attacks by Elon Musk on Jess Phillips, who's the safeguarding minister, was a line that's being crossed. The basic problem here is well known, he says. We can't have another review. But that doesn't go to the point. The reporting we've shown on the channel, 6 towns were mentioned in that J report. Rochdale just once, as Robbie Moore was saying 2 moments ago, in 400 pages. We found evidence of 50 towns where this issue is there, many in court reports, in official documentation. I think that's why many think it's time that this government does join those dots and look at it nationally. Now, that doesn't mean don't implement what Jay recommended, but Jay's report was into the issue of child abuse across all sections of society, not just in these towns by these different groups, and that's part of the problem. But to say we're jumping on the bandwagon of the far right, I think is a misstep, and it doesn't quite grasp the width of the concern across society about this problem.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, our political editor. Thank you. We'll speak to you a little bit later on, hopefully.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that Chris's question was put out on GB News on Twitter, and it's been viewed millions upon millions of times, and Elon Musk has commented upon it, really making the news there.
Yeah, he has indeed. And also, there have been some comments to suggest that Keir Starmer appeared to be more concerned with defending the honour of Jess Phillips, his minister, rather than potentially talking about the issue at hand, which is the rape of many children at the hands of grooming gangs up and down the country. But there you go. Make of it what you will.
Well, let's move on now, because, of course, the reason why the Prime Minister was there wasn't grooming gangs. He was at that hospital to talk about the situation in our health service. Indeed, no institution is more important to the security of the country than the NHS.
What about the armed forces?
Well, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, was saying the NHS is that most important linchpin. He earlier delivered his landmark speech on reforming the health service and cutting waiting times.
Yes, he promised to get the system working again, as the service must no longer be a national money pit.
Let me be crystal clear. That money will be used not as it's been in the past, as just sort of papering over the cracks. That's the definition of the sticking plaster politics that we were elected to change. No, this is the year we roll up our sleeves and reform the NHS. A new era of convenience in care, faster treatment at your fingertips, patients in control, an NHS fit for the future.
Well, apologies for the audio quality on that clip of the Prime Minister there, but joining us now is the chair of the Tower Hamlets Clinical Commissioning Group, Sir Sam Everington. Thanks so much for being with us today. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say?
Well, it's a really good idea. It's something we've been doing in the East End of London for a long time, which is basically asking specialists for advice rather than months waiting on a waiting list to be seen in outpatients. So typically about 2/3 of our referrals will come back with advice from the specialist in the hospital within 1 week, problems sorted. And so we've been doing it for a long time, and the Prime Minister basically has announced today that he's going to spread this across the country, and that's really good news.
So this is about sharing best practice then. If your area is already doing this, your clinical commissionings, we're already doing this type of thing. So is it just that other areas of the country are a bit behind?
Yes, and under-resourced. So the important thing is that the GPs are actually resourced to do this and supported to do this. So, for example, we should ensure that every patient can get a blood test in their general practice, and that GPs have access to all the diagnostic tests that you could expect a hospital specialist to have access to. Now, the good part about this is that actually it's much, much cheaper also, actually, if it's managed in primary care. You know, the equivalent cost is about 1/10 of what it costs to have the problem sorted out in a hospital. So good news, it needs to be widespread. In fact, almost every referral that goes to hospital to a specialist should be, please give me advice.
Yeah, that's ridiculous if you have to go to a hospital every time just to have something like a blood test.
Yes.
I mean, the amount of resources.
But Sir Sam, the big elephant in the room here, of course, is social care, which we know there won't be a plan that the government considers until at least 2028. We know that hospitals are blocked up with people who really should be having care in the community, but instead are using beds in our hospitals. Is it disappointing that there's no social care plan here?
Well, we've got some of the solutions to this in the East End of London. For many years, we've contracted all our GPs to run teams, in other words, virtual wards in the community, with those really complicated patients that are housebound, terminally ill. And we have a team that meets regularly, supports the patients proactively. We don't wait till they get ill. We're contacting them all the time to check they're okay. And for example, this means that patients can die where they choose to die, which is actually at home or in their community and certainly surrounded by their family. You know, it's really a bit of a scandal in this country that around 47% of people with terminal illness die in hospital. And we know you could cut that to 1/3. And we know that patients would far prefer to die at home surrounded by their families. And it's entirely possible if you create these virtual teams to support these very frail, housebound, terminally ill patients at home. So, yes, you mentioned earlier on about spreading good practice. Here's another example. This could be spread across the country. And finally, I'd say this means, for example, that all my patients with terminal illness get my mobile phone. They can ring me, they can text me at any time. You know, most of what you need to do in terminal illness is actually just support people. And supporting people virtually is fine. Just a friendly face that they can ring and when they're frightened and worried.
Yeah, I think that's so important, so important. So Sam Everington, hopefully we'll speak again. You're the chair for the Tower Hamlets Clinical Commission Group. Thank you very much indeed. Interesting, isn't it? How, you know, depending on where you are in the country, depending what your practice does specifically, you can have a completely different experience of the NHS.
Yeah, completely different. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's programme, including Angela Rayner ignoring hundreds of objections to build a new council estate. That's to come.
Very good afternoon. It's just gone 1:30. Here are your latest headlines from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has defended his position as Director of Public Prosecutions, saying child sexual exploitation is utterly sickening, and it was something that he had tackled head-on whilst in that role. The PM has also hit back at Musk over his comments on Twitter that claimed Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips is an evil witch and deserved to be in jail. The Prime Minister went on to accuse opposition politicians of amplifying what the far right is saying on sexual abuse after failing to act for 14 long years.
Victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously.
Commenting on the criticism of Jess Phillips, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said, Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, has dedicated her career to tackling sexual violence and abuse and to being a voice for victims and survivors of the most terrible crimes, including child sexual abuse. She has worked with whistleblowers and campaigned tirelessly for justice for those badly let down by endemic institutional failure. Meanwhile, this morning, the Prime Minister pledged to reduce NHS waiting lists, saying we need to reform the NHS from top to bottom and that he would fight for the NHS day and night. The Prime Minister has called for more convenience for patients and said that no institution is more important to the security of the country than the NHS. Now, a debate will be held this afternoon at 4:30 in Parliament on the petition calling for a general election. The petition has secured more than 2.5 million signatures after being launched by a West Midlands publican. This is the third most popular e-petition since 2010, after easily surpassing the required 100,000 signatures required for a debate to take place. The debate will be opened by Lib Dem MP Jamie Stone, and the government will send a minister to respond. And weather warnings persisted across the country this morning as many commuters suffered travel disruptions from severe weather. Major roads were closed, railway lines blocked, and Manchester Airport's runways were closed early on this morning because of the heavy snow, but they have since reopened. Travel disruptions are predominantly due to flooding and thawing snow and heavy rain. This comes after most of the UK saw heavy snow or icy rainfall over the weekend, and we even reached the coldest night of the winter so far at minus 13.3 degrees. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2541 and €1.2039 euros. The price of gold is £2,111 and 62 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,231 points.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The wintry weather continues, warnings remain in place, and flood warnings are also now across much of the UK because it's been so wet recently from this area of low pressure. It is heading out into the North Sea. Lots of isobars on the chart telling us it's windy out there, and that wind is feeling particularly cold. The rain and snow in eastern England, that is though clearing away, so turning a bit drier here. Further showers further west, chiefly of rain. some snow over the hills, certainly further snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. That brisk wind bringing the chill. Temperature actually falling this afternoon across the southeast, generally 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius, but everywhere feels colder because of that strong wind, which will continue to bring a mixture of rain, sleet and snow showers into Northern Ireland. Small snow showers packing into northern Scotland. Could be very icy as we go through the evening as temperatures tumble back down to freezing, with those snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. A mix of rain, sleet and snow across Northern Ireland, but we could see a further covering in places, and again, likely to be icy here. Same goes for Wales. We could see a further few centimetres of snow, particularly over hills, but even some down to low levels, and we'll see a few flurries across the southeast. So again, potentially very icy as we go through the night, and we see these showers continuing to feed in, making for some very slippery conditions. Much of the east will stay dry overnight, and we will see those temperatures again widely falling down to or a few degrees below freezing. Rural spots many degrees below freezing. So a bit of a mishmash through the night and into the morning. Again, potentially very icy for Tuesday morning's commute. I think many places will be dry and bright through Tuesday. There'll still be some showers coming into Northern Ireland, northwest England. Again, chiefly of rain at low levels, but some snow on the hills. Wintry showers in northern Scotland. Much of the south and east dry and sunny tomorrow, but still feeling cold.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Multiple issues on the M6 this lunchtime. Firstly, in Cumbria, 2 lanes coned off both sides between Kirby, Lonsdale and Kendal, junction 36 to 37. Slow going, there's an overturned vehicle. 2 lanes shut southbound around Crewe, 17 to 16. Flooding means a queue of around about half an hour. Also southbound 524A. That's away from Castle Bromwich, a lane shut. Slow for emergency repairs. Flooding means the clockwise M60, a lane shut and slow. Worsley 13 to the East Lancs Road at 14. Northbound M1 flooding 2 around Nottingham 24 to 25. A lane shut. Eastbound M50 at Ledbury at 2 closed for flooding. And the anti-clock M25 shut Leatherhead to Reigate 9 to 8 in big queues for emergency barrier repairs there. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's now 1:39. Now, locals in a tiny, idyllic English village are absolutely furious because they face being overwhelmed by a massive 8,400 home estate and a solar panel farm the size of 106 football pitches.
Well, despite considerable local opposition, Angela Rayner is planning to force the development in Rodmersham, a village with a population of just 555 people.
Now, this is just one village, but it's a story that could be replicated up and down the country if Angela Rayner is going to reach her pledge for 1.5 million new homes.
Well, let's speak to Parish Councillor Monique Bonney and local resident Lucy Windsor. First of all, Monique, if you would, what is the proposal here?
This proposal's for 8,400 houses. It's for an A2M2 link road, a new motorway junction in the area of outstanding natural beauty, and about 1.7 million square foot of commercial space. And it surrounds not only Rodmersham, but also our neighbouring villages. And in total, there's about 11 parishes that are affected and strongly objecting to this scheme. In addition, poor old Rodmersham is also on the other side of it, has a solar farm proposal, which again, is an absolute travesty because the whole area is high-grade agricultural land. I'm going to waft a map at you. This is the southeast. The blue, that tiny section, is the highest grade agricultural land in the country. And as you see, it was a tiny, tiny proportion.
Yeah.
So,
Monique, just tell us why, because you know as well as we do that there is demand for housing in this country.
Absolutely.
And the government has this pledge that they need to build all of these houses. 1.5 million is their plan over 5 years. So if they're not going to build them here, why should they not be built where you are?
So we have a local plan, is classed as out of date. I'm also the district councillor for the neighbouring villages as well as my village. We had a plan, and we're going through the process of creating a new local plan. We have over 7,000 planning permissions that have been granted but not yet been built out, with a further 1,700 on top of that has been allocated under the local plan. In addition to that, you get small windfall sites, etc., etc. So we can demonstrate that there is a supply of housing. The problem is that local authorities cannot enforce those planning applications. They cannot compel those developers to build. And the worst of all of this is in Queenborough and Rushenden on the Isle of Sheppey is a Homes England site that has been in place for about 20 years, and they have absolutely failed to deliver housing on that site. Originally, it was allocated for over 2,000 houses, and that has dropped and dropped and dropped to about 900, of which they've actually delivered 100 over 20 odd years. That's an absolute disgrace, because £30 million of taxpayers' money has been spent on that site, and they have failed to deliver. And that is in Kevin McKenna's constituency, yet he called in this application for 8,400 houses because he fully supports it, even though the majority of it isn't in his ward.
Right, let's move over to Lucy Windsor now. You're a local resident campaigning on this issue, but of course there is infrastructure that is proposed to go along with this, that extra road, and you're very near Sittingbourne, which is only an hour into King's Cross St Pancras station, if I'm not so mistaken. I mean, isn't this precisely the area of the country that is best suited to extra housing, particularly London and the South East?
Undoubtedly, there are huge social and economic benefits that will come with this scheme. I think the issue is that we feel utterly betrayed by our local government and all those that are associated with this, that it's hugely high-grade agricultural land. We are part of rural communities, and we followed that democratic plan approach to try and find the best sites that would be appropriate for development and could support local infrastructure and deliver the benefits that we also all want, but in a sustainable way. And we have this local plan-led approach, which allocates all these sites that Monique very eloquently outlined. And yet we're going completely against that. And, you know, the government, local and at the highest tier, is not following their own process. So
Lucy, what would you say to Angela Rayner, Lucy? Because Angela Rayner has essentially said, is essentially given herself the power to say yes or no to any sort of local planning application for housing development. So it is up to her and her alone to decide whether housing goes ahead or not. Do you think that's fair if there's huge amounts of local opposition?
She's utterly betrayed all of us as constituents. She asked us to follow the local plan and bureaucracy, and then decides at the last minute to rip it up just because she thinks she knows better. Angela nor Ken have never been to Rockmisham. They've never seen this pure grey agricultural land. We would really love them to put as much energy behind supporting the Homes England sites that have already been allocated in Kent and around the wider Sittingbourne area. She really needs to understand what's important to our local communities and the devastation that she will cause for an absolute lifetime, generations worth of agricultural land that will disappear purely over a whim and a political point.
OK, well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. Councillor Monique Bonney and local resident Lucy Windsor, really great to get your views across. Well, this is a big problem for Angela Rayner. She's got this pledge for 1.5 million homes across the country. She can essentially say yes or no. She can bulldoze any local opposition. Do locals and local communities know best about housing, or should it be some sort of top-down government mandate? Because there's been poor planning, in my view, about immigration and the like.
Hang on. Is it a top-down thing, or is it a bottom-up thing? I mean, it's not the government that's seizing land. Someone owns this land and wants to build on the land. The local community don't own the land. A private individual does.
Hang on.
If the
Angela
private
Rayner
individual
talks about devolution, right? Talks about how important it is for locals to have their views heard. Talks about how important it is for local authorities and councils and everything to decide decisions that affect them locally. But no, not when it comes to housing developments.
I didn't realise
that's either for the the developers to decide or for her to decide.
I didn't realise you were such a collectivist.
Well,
Emily.
I'm just so angry that we're in this position where we have to build and concrete over beautiful landscape in this beautiful country just because our population has increased by millions due to our government's pathetic immigration policies.
I think even if
that's why I'm angry.
Even if we had zero migration, there would still be a need to build a lot more houses. I mean, people are getting divorced more than they used to. you get different sort of...
It's true, people are living alone more.
People are living alone more, people are living longer, and also you have internal migration. People might want to move from areas that used to have more jobs to areas that now have more jobs.
People are living in smaller homes, though, aren't they?
They are, and we're actually, this is a really bad thing about not building houses. You look at a lot of our major cities across the UK, houses that were built for whole families have been divided up so that one floor is now one family and one floor is now... And in many cases, they've been divided up again. And so we create more housing units, to use the ridiculous government phrase, but actually people's quality of life is decreasing, even though the numbers on the spreadsheet say more houses.
I just think you can't talk about how important local voices are and how important devolution is, and then at the same point say, I'm going to decide whether that local development goes ahead or not.
I think what we can all decide...
Is that not a contradiction?
I think that what we can all decide is that if these houses are going to be built, they'd better be beautiful.
Yeah, well, they're unlikely to be. No offence to, I believe it is Queen's Estate.
And one of the really sad things that this government has done is shut down the Office for Place, which was the government department actually only set up last year that was going to make sure that there were design codes to make sure that houses are beautiful.
On that note, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Coming up, sorry to say, it's National Divorce Day. We're going to find out why so many Brits are choosing to start 2025 single and perhaps ready to mingle.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Britain's Royal Collection of Art is one of the most important and largest in the world. And it's also one of the last great European royal collections to remain intact. And built up over many centuries, it has extraordinary depth. And curators have delved into its riches to produce an exhibition of Italian drawings between 1450 and 1600. There are household names here: Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. Some of the drawings are complete works in themselves. Some are studies for images that would appear in much larger pieces, and some are anatomical studies which enabled these artists to draw the human form in all its perfection.
This is the earliest drawing in the exhibition of around 1450, and it's made by Fra Angelico, the great Florentine painter. It may seem an obvious thing to say, but we only have drawings like this if they have survived. And these drawings were not seen at the time as works of art. They were workshop studies. They were as functional as a hammer or a paintbrush, if you like, in the workshop. But the fact that a drawing would survive from 1450 to the present day shows that first it was useful, and it was a work that would have been referred to constantly in the artist's studio, and only later was it valued by collectors as an exemplar of the artist's genius, if you like, the way in which we might think of it today. So a drawing like this, which is in almost perfect condition, has got a history of being valued for different reasons from when it was produced to the present.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, it's 1:51 and it's National Divorce Day. Don't worry, we're not getting a divorce.
Didn't realise we were... were you referring to me and you, or your actual real husband?
Me and you.
Right,
But,
yes,
no divorces are taking place.
Absolutely. Well, it's the most common day of the year for marriages to end. So let's speak to the family law solicitor, Andrew Ormrod. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. Is it really... Do we see genuinely a big spike on, what is it, the 6th of January?
Well, good afternoon. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of truth in it in terms of the uptick or increase in new inquiries and instructions that we receive on the first working Monday of the new year. And there are lots of reasons for that. You know, as we approach Christmas, you've got families striving for the perfect Christmas to really make something of it, and the stresses that come with that, the expense of it. You've got the chaotic December that we have, where there's Christmas parties, there's social gatherings, and of course there's alcohol involved in all that. And then of course you've got people spending more time at home, less time at work, and sort of living at close quarters with people and family members whom they may not all usually do. So all these factors lead to somewhat of a pressure cooker situation, which I suppose leads people to reevaluate where they are and come to the decisions that they do around this time of year.
So are affairs more likely in December, around the Christmas period?
Well, I think when you've got alcohol involved, you've got all these social gatherings, it's probably a contributory factor.
And you're broke.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's the classic Christmas party situation, right? You get with a colleague and then all hell breaks loose.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, in terms of the research that we undertook, there was a number of main reasons for people deciding to divorce. It was 38% who cited infidelity. Some people said lack of communication, and others were growing apart. So there's a lot of reasons for this, which contribute to people coming to these decisions.
Fascinating. Andrew, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Andrew Ormrod, thank you very much. You're a family law solicitor. Slightly depressing note to end the hour, but hopefully everyone's staying together.
In good news, I think we peaked with divorces in the sort of early 2000s, late 90s. There were fewer
everyone was getting divorced then, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, plenty more to come
here. Good luck
to
you if you are single and ready to mingle.
Absolutely. But do stay with us. We're going to be looking into the grooming gang scandal after this.
Chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Weather and flood warnings remain in place. The wintry weather will continue for most of this week. Further snow showers in places tonight. If you don't get the snow showers, then it's going to be cold and frosty and potentially icy. The low pressure system that brought all the snow over the weekend is now heading out into the North Sea, taking its wet weather with it. But behind it, the wind's coming down from the north, bringing snow showers across northern Scotland. A mixture of rain, sleet and snow showers for Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. You could easily get a few more centimetres of snow in places here, but it's going to be quite patchy. Certainly close to the coast, mostly rain, but with temperatures tumbling, any showers could lead to things being very icy through the night and first thing on Tuesday morning. So a frosty old start for many central and eastern parts, dry, fine and sunny start, and many places will stay that way through the day. But more snow showers will continue to come in across northern Scotland. Again, perhaps rain close to coast, but inland and certainly over any hills, there'll be more snow building up. Wintry mix across Northern Ireland, sleet, hail, some snow showers here. Same goes for Wales. Again, you could wake up to a covering a further few centimetres in places, showers into the southwest, again potentially making things very slippery on those roads and pavements. During the day we'll continue to see some showers into the west, some getting into northwest England, again chiefly of rain at low levels here, but many eastern and southern parts dry, fine and sunny. Still a cold wind blowing, but not quite as strong, quite as bitter as the winds have been today. But temperatures are still going to struggle below average, even in the sunny spell. 6 or 7 across the south at best. Many places not much above freezing. Another hard frost Tuesday night into Wednesday. And then for Wednesday, we need to keep our eyes on this weather system coming up from the south. Some uncertainty about how far north it gets, but if it hits the colder air, it could bring some significant snow across parts of the south. This is on Wednesday. Stay updated to the forecast.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
£50,000 in tax-free cash is like having over £4,000 each month to play with for a whole year. And it could be yours in the biggest Great British giveaway so far. That could be a holiday each month, your mortgage covered, or just the ability to send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, our next guests have been working closely with celebrities and MPs to help clean up our planet.
Very important. Think Ocean was founded in 2021 with two main goals. One, educating the next generation to make sure that they know when they're growing up that naturally we have to take care of the planet and cleaning pollution that's already in the environment.
Well, joining us now to tell us more is Think Ocean's founder, Hugo Valdez-Vera, and the co-founder, Nolene Mariappan. Really good to see you both this morning. So, Nolene, let's start with you. What is Think Ocean and why did you want to start this back in 2021?
Yes, so Hugo had actually been working on the environment and climate action for quite a long time. When he moved to the UK, he realised that there was a growing problem with plastic pollution and that more needed to be done because people weren't actually seeing the link between plastic, the impact on the environment and climate change. So he founded the organisation and I joined him with three goals, really. Education, looking at technology to scale solutions and looking at how we develop more circular economy programmes. So actually looking at reusing, recycling, actually creating local economies from what people would consider waste.
Hugo, just how bad is plastic pollution around the world, and especially here in the UK?
Well, it is bad, but we don't know the extent of how bad it is. You know, this is not much interest from the bigger players or, some government for us to know every detail of the pollution. So if we know that is from 1 to 10 is 2, probably it's about 6.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Monday, the 6th of January. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
More horrific developments now from the ongoing grooming gang scandal. New reports reveal civil servants' delayed attempts to secure compensation for victims.
Sir Keir Starmer, however, says there are too many people jumping on the far-right bandwagon. And he also said misinformation is inflicting more damage on the victims.
The victims here suffered terrible abuse. Unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to.
And also risks dividing the Reform Party, as Elon Musk calls for Nigel Farage to be replaced as leader, saying he's not up to the task. Will Musk's comments split the supporter base of that party in two?
Well, it may look beautiful, but the snow has caused travel chaos around the UK. We'll have all the latest live throughout the rest of the day.
OK, well, a couple of developments to bring you. We're hearing that the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is going to make some kind of statement this afternoon on child sexual exploitation and abuse. I don't know if it's specifically going to be on the challenge of grooming gangs or rape gangs, but she'll be making a statement. Also, the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, has piped up on the issue of Elon Musk. He says he's demanded that the US ambassador should be summoned to be asked why an incoming US official, Elon Musk, is suggesting the UK government should be overthrown. So there you go.
I think he did that while going down a zip line, didn't he? No, this is...
Someone in the US ambassador.
This is a significant moment that the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, will now be going to Parliament, because it's not just about what she says, it's an opportunity for opposition MPs to question the Home Secretary over this issue. And that'll be a fairly detailed back and forth. There's opportunity in her statement for interventions, but also, of course, for the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. He was doing the rounds on the media yesterday. He will clearly have a lot to say on this issue, because the Tory party are calling for that full inquiry.
And I don't think there's a strong enough answer as to why there shouldn't be one. We've looked at the flaws of previous reports, the child exploitation report, the wide-reaching one, not specific, only mentioned Rotherham once, does not address the 50 or so towns and cities that have been implicated in the grooming gang scandal, and then the other reports that only focused on one town or another. Not adequate, really, is it, for a scandal that's been going on for so long and is probably going on today?
It seems that everyone's forgotten that the IICSA inquiry, the independent inquiry independent inquiry into child sexual exploitation, it was sort of set up in the wake of the scandal of Jimmy Savile and all the rest of that. So it looked at such a wide array of different issues, and only one subsection was related to grooming gangs. People are erroneously describing this as a grooming gang inquiry. It simply wasn't.
Yeah, it's not. It's actually, that is a mistruth, as Keir Starmer might say. But yes, this is the issue of group localised child sex exploitation on street gangs. That's a specific type of sexual exploitation of young people, children, in this country, and that's what needs to have a specific inquiry, or a lot of people believe it does.
Well, send your views. Do you think another inquiry would be good, or is that just another opportunity for politicians to have a talking shop? Do you want action rather than an inquiry? Well, gbnews.com/you'll say is the way to get involved. All to come, of course, after your latest news headlines with Sophia Hill.
Thank you, Tom and Emily. It's just gone 2 o'clock. Here are your latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Top story, the Prime Minister has defended his position as Director of Public Prosecutions, saying child sexual exploitation is utterly sickening, and it was something he had tackled head-on whilst in that role. The PM also hit back at Elon Musk over his comments on Twitter that claimed Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips is an evil witch and deserved to be in jail. Sir Keir Starmer went on to accuse opposition politicians of amplifying what the far right is saying on sexual child abuse, after failing to act for 14 long years.
Victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously.
Commenting on the criticism of Jess Phillips, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said, Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, has dedicated her career to tackling sexual violence and abuse and to being a voice for victims and survivors of some of the most terrible crimes, including child sexual abuse. She has worked with whistleblowers and campaigned tirelessly for justice for those badly let down by endemic institutional failure. Meanwhile, this morning, the Prime Minister pledged to reduce NHS waiting lists, saying, "We need NHS reform from top to bottom," and that he would fight for the NHS day and night. The Prime Minister has called for more convenience for patients and has said no institution is more important to the security of the country than the NHS. Now, a debate will be held this afternoon at 4:30 in Parliament on a petition calling for a general election. The petition has secured more than 2.5 million signatures after being launched by a West Midlands publican. This is the third most popular e-petition since 2010, after easily surpassing the required 100,000 signatures required for a debate to take place. GB News spoke to the petition's founder, Michael Westwood, a short while ago about his expectations.
Something I expected us all to be cheerful. I sensed out there in hope that obviously, when you do anything in life, you hope it goes the best it possibly can. And I think this has probably gone as best it possibly can to be cheerful. Now, a man has been charged with assisting former soldier Daniel Khalife after he escaped from prison.
Daniel Khalifa was found guilty of spying for Iran after a trial in November last year and admitted to escaping from HMP Wandsworth. Imran Chowdhury, a 25-year-old from North East London, has been charged with 1 count of assisting an escaped prisoner and will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court tomorrow. And today is Justin Welby's final day as the Archbishop of Canterbury as he prepares to step down over failures in handling a Church of England abuse scandal. Almost 2 months after announcing his resignation, he will officially quit the role at midnight tonight. It follows an independent review that concluded John Smith, a barrister and Christian camp leader, might have been brought to justice if Archbishop Welby had reported him to the police in 2013. The Archbishop has made few public appearances since mid-November and did not give the traditional Christmas Day sermon from Canterbury Cathedral. And weather warnings persisted across the country this morning as many commuters suffered from travel disruption due to severe weather. Major roads have been closed, railway lines blocked, and Manchester Airport's runways were closed early on this morning because of heavy snow, but have since reopened. Travel disruptions are predominantly due to flooding from thawing snow and heavy rain. This comes, of course, after most of the UK saw heavy snow or icy rainfall over the weekend, and we even reached the coldest night of the winter so far at minus 13.3 degrees. And it's the start of ceremony season as the Golden Globes took place last night. British stars Hugh Grant and Cynthia Erivo were among the top nominees, but Hollywood stars Demi Moore and Sebastian Stan took home the wins for Best Actress and Actor in the musical or comedy category. The hit musical Wicked and limited series Baby Reindeer were also among the key winners of the night. Fans also praised Nikki Glaser, though, for her masterclass hosting performance. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'll be back in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 2. Now, are politicians calling for an inquiry into grooming gangs simply jumping on a bandwagon of the far right? Well, that's the claim that appears to have been made by the Prime Minister when he spoke to reporters earlier today.
Yes, he also accused Elon Musk of spreading lies, claiming that many of those calling for an inquiry are not interested in the victims, they're only interested in themselves. Well, here's a bit of what he said.
It is something about the nature of our politics. Because once we lose the anchor that truth matters, in the robust debate we must have, then we're on a very slippery slope. And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth, and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts. And that's why this is actually an important point about our politics, not about what anybody may or may not say on Twitter. That actually isn't the main issue. The main issue is what are politicians here doing to stand up for the things that matter to our democracy and the way that we have robust debate. That's why I want to call this out.
OK, that's Keir Starmer a little bit earlier. But let's speak now to social policy analyst Dr Rakib Hassan on this. Rakib, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Keir Starmer does appear to be almost obsessed with the idea of the far right. What's this all about?
Well, it seems like whenever he's uncomfortable about anything, this far-right phrase is bandied out. I'm supportive of a statutory inquiry. I think that it's very important that determines accountability. I think there have been blatant institutional failures when it comes to various grooming gang cases across the country. And I also think this is an opportunity for the victims to be heard, victims who've been denied protection and justice. And you would think that protecting the most vulnerable in society, vulnerable working class girls, this would be natural territory for the left. This is not a moral panic. This is not a far right cause. And I think that the Prime Minister is a bit reckless there. And I think there's actually an opportunity to have a proper statutory inquiry, which really understands the complex dynamics at play, determines accountability, because it's clear as day that they're public officials, whether they're politicians, people who are highly ranked in police forces, social workers, safeguarding teams, even teachers who turned a blind eye, and they have to be held accountable.
Do you think one of the problems here, Rakib, is that for a long time, it basically only was the far right talking about this, and that sort of made everyone very, very uncomfortable. It sort of associated the scandal with the kind of people who go out and look for fights on the streets and sort of engage in football hooliganism, and that made a lot of people who should ordinarily think this is an absolutely disgraceful scandal that needs looking into more, exposing and pursuing, it made people think, oh, this is a right-wing conspiracy theory.
Tom, I'll push back slightly there. I'm sure you know Anne Cryer, who's the former Labour MP for Keighley. She raised the problem, the scourge of grooming gangs, predominantly Pakistani heritage adult males, targeting, abusing, exploiting white British working class girls as far back as 2003.
Yeah,
that was well before the English Defence League was even created following the Butchers of Basra demonstrations in my hometown of Luton. So I think the real problem here is that we've had figures on the left who have flagged this problem decades ago. I think that what I will say is that much of the response to that was scandalous. They were treated with contempt, even by fellow members of the left, so-called community leaders, and that there have been local police. I think the big story here is that class was a very powerful dynamic here. I think that what we have is a classist multicultural state, and many of these scandals are ultimately the product of a dangerous fusion of old and new, that traditional classism being blended with modern sensitivities on race. And I think that what we've seen here is that many white British working class girls, even though we do have grooming gang victims who belong to a variety of ethnic and religious communities, and I think that's often overlooked, but white British working class girls under that classist multicultural state have been severely let down.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Rakiba San, social policy analyst. Thank you. Yeah, I think you're totally wrong on that. The reason why, more of the media didn't pick up on this issue is because it contradicted with their idea of multiculturalism and that ideology that in order to maintain social cohesion in this country, you have to ignore any problems that may be among a particular ethnic minority or a particular religious background. It was just that mad idea that you can't talk about these issues for fear of there being more division, rather than the EDL.
I think both things can be true. I mean, it's very, very clear that Anne Cryer was trying to speak up about this.
You said that more journalists would have been speaking about this were it not for the fact that Tommy Robinson and the EDL had been talking about it, and that made it uncomfortable around the dinner table. No, the whole idea of these grooming gangs being predominantly from Pakistani heritage was what was uncomfortable to these people.
Yeah, I think both things can absolutely be true. And reading through some of the police reports on this, where you have, young girls taken from school gates, driven off to dark bedrooms to be gang raped repeatedly, somehow consented to that, was the idea of the police, was the idea of many of the people who sort of were looking through these cases and letting these people off. That's clearly an element of these girls would do that, wouldn't they? That is the classist element there. There is also the element of people thinking, oh, this is a racial topic that we don't want to tiptoe around. But on top of those two things, there is also the element that it was associated with street violence, skinheads.
That came afterwards.
Yes.
That came afterwards.
But it's a cocktail of all of these things.
Arguably, to things like grooming gangs being ignored, right? Would the EDL have existed? Anyway, a government spokesperson from the Home Office issued the following statement. No child should ever suffer sexual abuse or exploitation. It's paramount we do more to protect vulnerable children, which is why we are working at pace across government to drive forward real action to implement the recommendations of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse.
Well, earlier, our political editor Chris Hope questioned whether Sir Keir Starmer was exposing his own complicity in the scandal, avoiding launching that inquiry. Let's listen.
Critics will say it's not a far-right bandwagon issue, Prime Minister. The ICSA report looked at just 6 towns where grooming gangs were operating. Rochdale got one mention in 400 pages. We have found at GB News court reports showing gangs operating in 50 towns across the country. Are you certain, as Prime Minister, it's not going on today? Why don't you order a national public inquiry to join the dots between 50 towns, not 6, barely mentioned in the J report? Are you afraid it might expose failings as your role as a DPP? And that's why Elon Musk says, were you complicit in the rape of Britain? You have not... to go after the far right on this does not go to the heart of the problem.
No. Well, Chris, look, on my record, I think you were actually covering crime when I was DPP. You were quizzing me at the time. I've set out what I did. I actually changed the system because I could see some of the things that were going wrong. I wasn't prepared. Unlike, some Tory politicians, I'm not tweeting about it or talking about it. I got on with changing it. In relation to the serious point you do make, because, this is the victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously.
Well, let's speak now to the man himself, our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, what did you make of the PM's response to you?
Yes, hi Tom, hi Emily. I think it slightly misses a point. I mean, he does make a fair point that the Tories were in power for 14 years and didn't properly get round to implementing the J report that came out in 2022. He said, we will do that. Mandatory reporting of any suspicion of sexual abuse and the like will come into force. But that J report, of course, looked at issues of child protection across society, not at the issues which Charlie Peters' reporting has found out. And that key point, I think, that the J report mentions, it looked at 6 towns. Rochdale got 1 mention in 400 pages, but we found court reports showing evidence in 50 towns across the country. Why can't he join the dots? He's a very compassionate man. He understands that. I don't know why he's not engaging with it. And to say that it's jumping on the far right bandwagon, it just inflames people who think, well, no, I'm not far right, and I'm concerned about it. We're getting that certainly on social media and in the inbox. Chris Philp, who's the Shadow Home Secretary, he says it's disgraceful that Keir Starmer is smearing people who are concerned about rape gangs as jumping on the far right bandwagon rather than facing up to his own record, they say, on this, and looking again at his refusal to hold a full national inquiry. We'll hear later from Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, or one of her team in the Home Office, around 5:30 on GB News. There'll be a statement in the House of Commons on this issue. Yes, Elon Musk is stirring it up. He's got his platform, he owns X. He's using that to promulgate his concerns about the UK and the government's approach on this issue. But I don't think it's fair to say it's a far-right issue, and that's where I think it was a misstep.
Say, people don't care that much about what's going on Twitter. We should concentrate on the issues. But then he did have quite a lot to say about Elon Musk, which is Twitter. Also hearing from Ed Davey, I'm not sure if you've seen this Liberal Democrat leader. He's chimed in. He's saying the US ambassador should be summoned in to be asked why an incoming US official is suggesting the UK government should be overthrown, of course referring to Elon Musk. Everyone has something to say about Elon Musk.
Yeah, I think the government is finding it quite difficult to know what to say about Elon Musk. His name was barely mentioned by the Prime Minister. When he takes over this Department of Government Efficiency in Washington on January the 20th, he will become then a person who might be speaking for the administration. Until now, he's a private individual, a businessman who has car-making operations in Germany and the like. I was struck by an answer from Sir Keir Starmer, not on camera there. He did say that he's not closed his mind to a national inquiry if others put allegations to us. So one idea might be that we can pull together the work that Charlie Peters has done and give that to 10 Downing Street and see where that takes us, because it does look like there is a wider issue here. It all started when we revealed how Oldham had asked for a national inquiry, and Jess Phillips, who's the Minister in charge of safeguarding, she said that there wasn't going to be one, and that's what triggered this whole debate, I think. It hasn't gone away, and there's a feeling out there that the government is not yet gripping what could be the true scale of this problem.
Absolutely. It will be fascinating to see what the Home Secretary has to say at 5:30, broadcasting here, of course, on GB News. But, Chris, one other story that is perhaps not getting the attention that in ordinary times it would, and that's of Tulip Siddiq, a Treasury Minister meant to be dealing with anti-corruption in the UK, seems to be sort of falling into a corruption scandal herself.
That's right, Tom. Sir Keir Starmer announced in that press conference in that hospital that Tulip Siddiq is now being investigated by the government advisor on ministerial standards over her property holdings. Keir Starmer said that Tulip Siddiq had acted entirely properly by going to Sir Laurie Magnus, who does the investigations. It's about her links between properties and the ousted Bangladeshi government. It was emerged in the Financial Times over the weekend that Siddiq became owner of a 2-bed flat near King's Cross in 2004, and according to the FT, didn't pay for it. Now, Sir Keir Starmer said he's got full confidence in her and the process which will now take place. And the Ministerial Code allows people like Sadiq to ask the advisor to establish the facts. And on her behalf, Tulip Sadiq has said this morning that she's done nothing wrong. She's been the subject to inaccurate reporting. But as things stand, Sadiq will now not be going to China with Rachel Reeves. It's awkward because her role at the Treasury is in anti-corruption and how the city regulates itself. She may have to withdraw from some parts of her work, but this is a slow ticking story below the line of the more important one about the grooming gangs, but one to watch in coming weeks.
Well, we'll keep our eyes on that one too. Chris Hope, thanks so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Appreciate it.
OK, well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Up next, we're going to hear from a former Reform mayoral candidate. See what he thinks about Elon Musk dropping his support for Nigel Farage. Stay with us.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Maria, potholes, the bane of everybody that uses the road, whether you're a car driver or a cyclist, as a cyclist or even worse. How have we got into this situation where our roads are in such a bad state?
Well, part of it is to do with actually our climate. In somewhere like, say, Sweden, like the snow will fall on the ground, it will stay there for months. Whereas here we've got what's called a freeze-thaw climate, where the water comes down, then we might have a cold snap and it freezes, and the water within the pothole will then expand and make the pothole bigger. Then we might have a mild spell, and then that process repeats. So, we do actually need extra funding to acknowledge the fact that, we just live in a climate where we're sort of particularly vulnerable to potholes.
Why? I mean, the fact that this happens, these weather conditions happen, is no great surprise to anybody. Why has the problem been ignored for so long?
I think what's happened is we've had short-term funding. So it's like, oh, there's a pothole, let's patch it up. Oh, there's another one, let's patch it up. But the patches aren't actually really that strong, so then they break down again. So, really what we need is to have roads completely resurfaced, and then they'll just be pothole-free for a very long time. And that really is how funding should be. That's the direction funding should go in, as opposed to just sort of dribs and drabs here and there.
Do you think this government are going to be good for the motorist, or is there indeed a war on the motorist still?
The different parties come in and they've all got different policies that they wheel out, then they cancel the policies, and then there's so much lack of transparency. Like, for example, with the pothole issue, sometimes the government, whichever government is in office, will do some big showboating about how they're going to give X amount of potholes, and you still think that sounds really good.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. This is Good Afternoon Britain. It's now 2:25. And in a shock move yesterday, in case you hadn't noticed, Elon Musk called for Nigel Farage to be replaced as leader of the Reform Party, with the party leader left shocked by his comments.
Yes, Nigel Farage indicated the two had fallen out over Elon Musk's support for Tommy Robinson, after the world's richest man claimed Robinson, who was imprisoned for a variety of things, none of which were political, was being held as a political prisoner.
OK. Well, joining us now is former Reform UK London mayoral candidate Howard Cox. Howard, what do you make of it all?
Well, hello, Emily. Hello, Tom. Happy New Year. I'm just a mere tadpole in this political turbulent ocean. But honestly, as far as I'm concerned, I'm delighted that Elon Musk has actually jumped in on regarding the rape gang issues, and I hope he continues. That's free speech. But really, he shouldn't be actually commenting on who should be leading any political party whatsoever. That's nothing to do with him being an American citizen. So Nigel is a leader of reform and he's going nowhere. I mean, my inbox is swamped with support for Nigel, and he's hugely popular. And really, when you compare Labour leadership and to the Tory leadership, Nigel is the only choice.
Where do you think it all went wrong between Nigel and Elon? Because we're looking at pictures now of the men sitting down in Mar-a-Lago only a couple of weeks ago, and all this briefing around a vast donation to Reform UK. They seem to be buddies, and now it's all fallen apart.
Well, I don't think it is falling apart. I think, they were sorted this out. There's a difference. It's free speech, a difference about 6 bits and pieces. I mean, and you don't have to like or support Tommy Robinson to understand that the rape gang issues would not have been top of the agenda unless he'd been talking about it, which is what he's doing along with Elon now. So I'm glad this has happened in that respect. But in terms of actually them falling out, I don't think so. I still think, and I've listened to you interviewing Elon's father, and he said he's still going to be donating. I think, at the inauguration, sit round over a large a glass of sarsaparilla and say, look, this is the situation. I don't support Tommy Robinson, Nigel would say, and Elon would say, I do, because he is a political prisoner. I tend to support the fact that he shouldn't be in jail. So from that point of view, I think that's what's going to happen. I think, to be honest, the mainstream media are going over the top with all of this difference of opinion.
OK, so you think it's a storm in a teacup, perhaps. It's quite interesting, actually. We spoke to Elon Musk's dad as well on this show last week, before this had sort of kicked off. And he was saying that he didn't think Nigel Farage was a strong man, didn't think that Nigel was up to the job, essentially, of being leader or leading the country. It was slightly vague. But it's quite interesting then that a couple of days later, Elon Musk takes the same line, because they are estranged, aren't they? But they seem to see this issue quite similarly.
I take your point on that point. I've known Nigel for 10 years, and I've seen him take lots of bric-a-bracs, a lot of nasty, he is a Marmite character, all those sorts of things, but I can tell you he is strong. He wouldn't be sitting where he is now if he wasn't a strong character. So I disagree with Elon and Elon's father in the respect of he's not up to the job. He is up to the job in doing this. He's got us out, he got Brexit, he got all those sorts of things. He's now an MP, and his popularity is rocketing at that point of view. I don't always agree with it. I would like to see, my strong criticism about my party is that their focus should be attacking Labour and not launching, and for them not launching a public inquiry. Really go for the jugular, because I think Starmer is covering a lot up.
OK, and just finally, Howard Cox, of course, you are one of the most best-known names in Reform UK. Do you think that Nigel Farage has got the right strategy here in distancing himself from sort of the Tommy Robinson side of politics? Because there are some sort of anti-establishment right-wing parties that do take in the sort of street march kind of politics and absorb that. And then there are other parties that think, actually, that's not the way to go, that's not the way to reach the mainstream. Do you think Nigel Farage has chosen the right path here?
Yeah, I don't fully agree with Nigel on way he's handling Tommy Robinson's situation. He doesn't have to like him. He doesn't have to agree with a lot of the things he's done in the past. I don't know Tommy. I've never even met him. But all I know is what he did and produced that film, which he's been held in contempt of court for showing it again. Those sorts of things, I'm afraid, if you look at those things, it's very worrying. And it's been brought to a head by Elon Musk now. And I don't think he should be in jail. A contempt of court, I know you can go to jail for up to 2 years, which is what's happening with Tommy. The thing is, what he's saying is our children are being raped on an industrial scale, and we've got to stop that. So my message to Nigel, and I hope he takes this in the spirit it's meant, is to sit round the table and look at the issues, what he's talking about, because there's a lot of people that support Tommy Robinson also support Reform UK.
OK, well, Howard Cox, former Reform UK London mayoral candidate, great to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Now, some breaking news this hour. Reports from Canada claiming that their Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is expected to stand down as leader of the Liberal Party later today. That'll mean that he'll transition out of the role of Prime Minister. He is likely to announce his intention to stay in post until the party has chosen a new leader, however.
Yes, so he'll announce his intention to stay in his post until the party has chosen a replacement to take over as both leader and Prime Minister. So there you go, one of the most famous sort of liberal, progressive leaders in the Western world bites the dust.
Worth noting, too, that the man on the lips of every political anorak in Canada to take over the role of leader of the Liberal Party from Justin Trudeau is none other than former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney. He's been reportedly ringing round Liberal MPs in Canada. He's reportedly been in talks with major donors in left-wing politics in Canada. Could it be that the next Canadian Prime Minister would be the former Bank of England Governor, Mark Carney?
And what does that say about his position at the Bank of England?
Well, his former position at the Bank of England.
Yeah, former position, yes. Interesting, eh?
Very, very interesting. We'll be
Bank
keeping
of England, Mark Carney, to be potentially the next Prime Minister of Canada.
It does explain a lot of his political interventions in the last year or so of his governorship, and particularly his post-governorship. He's been very, very
Truth
vocal.
always comes out, doesn't it?
Very, very vocal on matters of British politics. Perhaps now we know why.
Yeah, it can be England, it can be Canada, wherever. Anyway, this is...
Same king.
This is good. Yeah, true. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Up next, the government, get this, is ditching its target to introduce a 2035 gas boiler ban. Now, this is very interesting because Labour have always pushed for more net zero. Now they're backtracking. Has the penny dropped on their net zero push? That's after your headlines. This is Sophia.
Very good afternoon. It's just gone 2:30. Here are your latest headlines from the GB Newsroom. Now, the Prime Minister has defended his position as Director of Public Prosecutions, saying sexual child exploitation is utterly sickening, and it was something he had tackled head-on whilst in that role. The PM has also hit back at Elon Musk over his comments on Twitter that claimed Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips is an evil witch and deserved to be in jail. Sir Keir Starmer went on to accuse opposing politicians of amplifying what the far right is saying on child sexual abuse after failing to act for 14 long years. Leader of the Lib Dems, Ed Davey, has said this afternoon that the US ambassador should be summoned over Elon Musk's online attacks.
This ambassador should make it clear, both to the current White House and the present-elect, that anyone who is working in a senior level in any American government needs to be very careful about how they comment on UK affairs, whether they're the richest man in the world or anyone else.
Now, commenting on the criticism of Jess Phillips, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, has dedicated her career to tackling sexual abuse and violence and has been a voice for victims and survivors of the most terrible crimes, including child sexual abuse. She's worked with whistleblowers and campaigned tirelessly for justice for those badly let down by endemic institutional failure. Meanwhile, this morning, the Prime Minister pledged to reduce NHS waiting lists, saying we need NHS reform from top to bottom and that he would fight for the NHS day and night. The Prime Minister has called for more convenience for patients and said that no institution is more important to the security of the country than the NHS. And a debate will be held this afternoon at 4:30 in Parliament on a petition calling for a general election. The petition has secured more than 2.5 million signatures after being launched by a West Midlands publican. This is the third most popular e-petition since 2010, after easily surpassing the required 100,000 signatures required for a debate to take place. The debate will be opened by Lib Dem MP Jamie Stone, and the government will send a minister to respond. Now, weather warnings persisted across the country this morning as many commuters suffered travel disruption from severe weather. Major roads have been closed and railway lines blocked. Manchester Airport's runways were closed early on this morning because of heavy snow, but have since been reopened. Travel disruptions are, of course, predominantly due to flooding from thawing snow and heavy rain after most of the UK saw heavy snow or icy rainfall over the weekend. We even reached the coldest night of the winter so far at a staggering minus 13.3 degrees. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Tatiana Sanchez will have your next headlines in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The wintry weather continues, warnings remain in place, and flood warnings are also now across much of the UK because it's been so wet recently from this area of low pressure. It is heading out into the North Sea. Lots of isobars on the chart telling us it's windy out there, and that wind is feeling particularly cold. The rain and snow in eastern England, that is though clearing away, so turning a bit drier here. Further showers further west, chiefly of rain. Some snow over the hills, certainly further snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. That brisk wind bringing the chill. Temperature actually falling this afternoon across the southeast, generally 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius, but everywhere feels colder because of that strong wind, which will continue to bring a mixture of rain, sleet and snow showers into Northern Ireland. Small snow showers packing into northern Scotland. Could be very icy as we go through the evening as temperatures tumble back down to freezing with those snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. A mix of rain, sleet and snow across Northern Ireland, but we could see a further covering in places, and again, likely to be icy here. Same goes for Wales. We could see a further few centimetres of snow, particularly over hills, but even some down to low levels, and we'll see a few flurries across the southeast. So again, potentially very icy as we go through the night, and we see these showers continuing to feed in, making for some very slippery conditions. Much of the east will stay dry overnight, and we will see those temperatures again widely falling down to or a few degrees below freezing. Rural spots many degrees below freezing. So a bit of a mishmash through the night and into the morning. Again, potentially very icy for Tuesday morning's commute. I think many places will be dry and bright through Tuesday. There'll still be some showers coming into Northern Ireland, northwest England. Again, chiefly of rain at low levels, but some snow on the hills. Wintry showers in northern Scotland. Much of the south and east dry and sunny tomorrow, but still feeling cold.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Issues on the M6 continue. Firstly, in Cumbria, 2 lanes out both ways between Kirkby Lonsdale and the Kendal turn off 36 to junction 37, an overturned vehicle causing delays. Also southbound M6, Knutsford to Middlewich, 19 to 18. Now 3 out of 4 lanes are coned off there. There's a broken down lorry, very slow still. Also southbound 17 to 16, pretty slow going. Some flooding there, but it's easing around Crewe. Eastbound M50 queuing a lane shut for flooding at Ledbury at 2. That means the westbound M50 entry slip is closed at junction 2. The northbound M1 Rugby to Catthorpe 18 up to the M6, that's 19, slow in the roadworks. 2 vehicles have had a collision, so a lane shut, and the anti-clock M25 still closed. Leatherhead to Reigate 9 to 8, big queues there for emergency repairs.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 20 to 3, and in just a moment we're going to be talking about whether or not your boiler will actually be banned. Confusing words coming out about that. But before then, Martin Daubney, you're up at 3 o'clock. What's coming up on your show today?
Hi guys, well after that astonishing outburst earlier on from the Prime Minister Keir Starmer branding people as far right if they want an inquiry into the grooming gang scandal, GB News has got an astonishing exclusive with a father called Marlon, whose daughter Scarlett, then 14, was trafficked, raped and abused, drugged for 2 years, and astonishingly they found themselves on the end of a police investigation. We'll be speaking with him. Charlie Peters had a sit down, and then the peerless Maggie Oliver will join us at 5 p.m. and that's both of them. How does it feel for you to be called far right by the Prime Minister? Breaking news, we're expecting in about an hour's time the High Prince of Woke, Justin Trudeau, expected to sit down. And now does that leave Britain as one of the last liberal islands left on the planet? The politics of the continent in Europe is swinging to the right. We've got Donald Trump coming in, and yet here we are we an outlier? And of course, 5:30 today, there is expected to be an emergency announcement by Yvette Cooper in Parliament on the grooming gang scandal. And at 4:30, there's that live debate on will there be a general election after the petition. You had the gentleman on who started that earlier on. We'll have that debate in full. Of course, they'll ignore it, but yet more pressure on our beleaguered Prime Minister. That's all coming 3 till 6.
Gosh, it's hard to think you could squeeze all that in. It's going to be an action-packed show. I can't wait for it. Martin, have an excellent day. Have an excellent show. We'll be watching and listening, of course. Martin there, coming up at 3 o'clock. You won't want to miss it.
Now, in a net zero U-turn, the government will ditch its plans to ban new gas boilers from 2035.
Yeah, this is extraordinary. The former Conservative government had promised a total ban, with Labour at the time accusing the Tories of failing to act quickly enough on the need to switch away from fossil fuels. What's changed?
Well, Labour ministers will now instead set out a warm homes plan laying out how long-term low-carbon heating methods will work. What on earth is going on? Let's speak to the Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities and indeed Shadow Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho. That's the more relevant title, I would have thought. Claire, thanks so much for being with us. This is very, very strange. Why the U-turn from the government?
Well, look, I think it's if they want to ditch the boiler ban, I don't think we've had complete confirmation of that yet. I would welcome that. We did a net zero reset, as you might remember, last year, and we already exempted households which weren't suitable for heat pumps for it. But I think if they want to go further, fine. But I do worry that what this actually is a bait and switch, because what they're bringing in the next 2 weeks is a boiler tax. So instead of banning people from using gas boilers, what I think they're going to do is actually allow Ed Miliband the powers to interfere with the price of gas boilers, which means that they can price people away from them, which is just as bad and actually worse, because all of those homes which either don't want or can't use a heat pump will be completely exposed to those additional costs.
Oh, my goodness. But, I mean, whenever we talk about heat pumps on this channel, and just in general in conversation, people say, my heat pump isn't very efficient, I regret buying it, it doesn't fit in a lot of different properties. And so Ed Miliband is essentially going to be forcing us in that direction anyway, regardless of the cost, and slapping an extra tax on it.
Yeah, and this is the problem. So actually 1% of households in the country have a heat pump. There's actually quite mixed reviews. Some people love their heat pump. Some people have found it hasn't worked for them. But I'm for consumer choice. If you want to get one, great, go for it. If you're a company that wants to produce a product and come up with a deal, great, that's brilliant. But what I do worry about is all of those households which will be left with much extra costs or not suitable. And then when they need a gas boiler, and, you know, when you have to replace your boiler, it's often, you know, it's gone overnight. You're left without hot water. And suddenly you'll be faced with hundreds of pounds extra in cost just because of Labour and Ed Miliband's ideological obsession of racing faster and faster towards net zero.
It is curious because we are looking now at a situation where gas boilers will be more expensive. Meanwhile, we have an Energy Secretary in Ed Miliband who's saying that energy will be cheaper. He keeps referencing this report that suggests that energy prices will be lower thanks to the net zero transition. And yet, every time we see an announcement, it's that energy is getting more expensive. Why the discrepancy?
Well, I mean, and as you'll know, Tom, I've been campaigning very hard on this issue because actually, if you look at the facts of that report, they do not say it will lead to lower bills. And actually, if you put in just even average assumptions about, for example, things like the cost of gas or what it might cost to hugely increase the amount of things that you need to build and the way that they're going to need to by 2030, actually, all of the evidence is that they're going to make electricity much, much, much more expensive. And just coming back to heat pumps, because this is why I think it's really relevant. If you look at countries around the world which have had high adoptions of heat pumps or electrical heating, it's always where that's worked for the consumer because actually electricity has been cheaper. So you can see that in France, you can see that in some other countries as well. I looked at all of these when I was in power. And what they're doing is the opposite. They're going to massively increase the cost of electricity. So the cost of operating these things will be much more expensive. And then, I think through the boiler tax, try and force people towards them as well. So it's just extra costs on people who are already, you know, going through a very difficult financial time, having just recovered from an inflation crisis. And I think it's also par for the course for a party that we've just seen has just been, you know, adding additional cost to people's lives, whether it's through the grocery tax, or the family holiday tax, or the national insurance tax, which is going to be passed on through higher prices. And actually, that's not what the country needs when it's just been through a massive cost of living crisis.
And Claire, just while we've got you, is Kemi Badenoch jumping on the far right bandwagon by calling for a public inquiry into the grooming gang scandal?
I mean, I think that was absolutely ludicrous from the Prime Minister. And to be honest, I think it's part of a trend with the left, where they're more interested in policing language than actually policing the industrial gang rapes that we saw across the country. I thought it was honestly abominable that he said that, because of course people care about this issue. These was vulnerable young children. And actually, when we were in office, I remember Suella calling out the Pakistani Muslim gangs. And again, the left ridiculed her and called her racist. And this is exactly the problem. We can't focus on, hurty words and language over the needs of these young victims who've been through just the most horrific crimes possible.
Really, really strong words there. Claire Coutinho, thanks so much for joining us and talking through those two issues. Shadow Energy Secretary, of course.
Thank you very much indeed. Let us know what you make of it all. gbnews.com/your say. But coming up, first it was snow, and now it's floods. Oh, great. We're going to look at the new weather warnings that are sweeping the nation.
Lucky us.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
My next guest's book will certainly provoke you. Lord Sarch's book, Orgasm, probes 21 such ideas, chapter by chapter, in a stimulating reading experience, covering subjects from geopolitics and etiquette to the economy and the afterlife. Lawrence Sarchi argues that rigorous thinking can create a blissful mental experience.
Well, the title is Orgasm, and I try to investigate the question of whether it's possible for there to be an orgasm of the mind which is equal in bliss to a physical orgasm. That's very interesting. And theoretically, the way that arises, I'll finish. Theoretically, the way that arises is by addressing conflicting ideas and then for there to be a revelation of true wisdom. That's the purpose of the book. And I think you can sum up British politics completely in 2 sentences. You'll understand very well, Michael. Conservatives are efficient but cruel. Labour is caring but incompetent. So you can see there that if you have a situation in which the Conservative Party turns out to be, in people's opinion, inefficient and cruel, well, then you're likely to have a very bad election result, which is exactly what we just did. And why?
So you have quite a lot to say to Kemi Badenoch. I mean, the first thing you would say to her would be, read my book, please, I suppose.
Well, that's absolutely the first thing. It's a perfect Christmas present for her to give, as I was saying. So that's number one. So after she's done that, well, then her level of wisdom, which I'm sure is already very high, will be greatly increased, and she'll be able to address the complex, provocative, controversial issues aired in this book.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, it's 2... I thought he was going to start. It's 2:50. Oh, you're still eating a biscuit, that's why. Yeah, so weather warnings persist across the country today. Commuters are suffering from travel disruption due to the severe rain and snow. I shouldn't have read that out with a smile.
No, because a major incident has now been declared in Leicestershire and more than 27,000 homes have been left without power across Yorkshire.
What an absolute nightmare. We're going to head to Bolton, where we can join our North West reporter, Sophie Reaper. Sophie, this weather is having a dramatic effect.
It is indeed, and I must say, a few moments ago, my cameraman and I were jesting that it actually seems to have warmed up slightly, but that, in fact, has dramatically changed. The temperature seems to have plummeted in the last 10 minutes alone. But I must say, it's worth it for us to be able to bring you this really rather beautiful view behind me. I'll just step out of the way so you can take a look at the beautifully snow-frosted Bolton Hills just there. Winter Hill over to my left, over there, and that gorgeous wind farm. But beauty aside, unfortunately, as you say, it's causing really rather dramatic disruption all over the country. As you say there, that major incident has been declared. And as the snow starts to melt, those flood warnings start to come into place. The Environment Agency in the last hour has increased that number of flood warnings. Over 300 of them now around the UK, and that means that flooding is likely. There are also, sorry, I should say the flooding is possible. There's around 165 flood risks in place where it is likely that flooding will be taking place. Of course, we've also seen major disruption across the board with travel. Manchester Airport closing its runway this morning for around 45 minutes. That was the second day in a row. We've seen road closures, we've seen rail closures. Across the board, this is having a major impact across the UK. And of course, we know now the Met Office has said that yellow weather warning for snow and ice will remain in place until at least tomorrow for large parts of the UK as well.
OK, well, Sophie Reaper, keep warm. It's an absolutely stunning view you're bringing us, but I can imagine it's a pretty nippy out there. Sophie Reaper, our North West reporter, there just outside of Bolton there. Beautiful scenes. You'd have that all concreted over. You'd have your high-rises.
No.
You would. You'd get your little bulldozer with Angela Rayner and just go...
No, because the beauty of urban planning... is that you need to build where there's demand. Build the skyscrapers in Manchester, as they're doing, and some nice...
Also in Rodmersham, in Kent.
Nice picturesque sort of villagey houses there. I mean, the people at the social enterprise Create Streets do some wonderful designs of what housing should look like in this country. You need a lot more like that. The sort of Building Beautiful Commission, Roger Scruton vision.
Building Beautiful would be nice, because there are far too many ugly houses around.
Quite right.
And ugly blocks of flats that probably could use with a bulldozer.
Ban concrete.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, who's this? David's got in touch. He says, I live in a small village in Barnsley, and just to make you aware, it's happening in a lot of places. Please Google solar farm Barnsley Grimethorpe Barnsley for more. This is the thing. Yes, 1.5 million homes. We probably do need them. Unfortunately, it's going to be, you know, you're not allowed to oppose it if you're a local anymore. It's just going to be whoosh.
Well, I mean, do you own the land? If not, should you really have the say?
I know people are just really angry that they're being forced to, you know, have all this housing in there, right next to their lovely little village.
Yeah, but the housing
You can understand that.
The housing
if you lived in a lovely little village, you'd be pretty angry,
the housing should come with services. It should come. It should come with more hospitals, but it can because it generates so much more money. Anyway, so much more to come. Don't go anywhere because Martin is up next, and you won't want to miss his show.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Weather and flood warnings remain in place. The wintry weather will continue for most of this week. Further snow showers in places tonight. If you don't get the snow showers, then It's going to be cold and frosty and potentially icy. The low pressure system that brought all the snow over the weekend is now heading out into the North Sea, taking its wet weather with it. But behind it, the wind's coming down from the north, bringing snow showers across northern Scotland. A mixture of rain, sleet and snow showers for Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. You could easily get a few more centimetres of snow in places here, but it's going to be quite patchy. Certainly close to the coast, mostly rain, but with temperatures tumbling, any showers could lead to things being very icy through the night and first thing on Tuesday morning. So a frosty old start for many central and eastern parts, dry, fine and sunny start, and many places will stay that way through the day. But more snow showers will continue to come in across northern Scotland. Again, perhaps rain close to coast, but inland and certainly over any hills, there'll be more snow building up. Wintry mix across Northern Ireland, sleet, hail, some snow showers here. Same goes for Wales. Again, you could wake up to a covering a further few centimetres in places, showers into the southwest, again potentially making things very slippery on those roads and pavements. During the day we'll continue to see some showers into the west, some getting into northwest England, again chiefly of rain at low levels here, but many eastern and southern parts dry, fine and sunny. Still a cold wind blowing, but not quite as strong, quite as bitter as the winds have been today. But temperatures are still going to struggle below average, even in the sunny spell. 6 or 7 across the south at best. Many places not much above freezing. Another hard frost Tuesday night into Wednesday. And then for Wednesday, we need to keep our eyes on this weather system coming up from the south. Some uncertainty about how far north it gets, but if it hits the colder air, it could bring some